The night Adrian Voss's men dragged Selena from her apartment, she didn't scream for help because she'd learned years ago that nobody came when women like her screamed. Blood dripped from her split lip onto the frozen Chicago sidewalk, while her ex-husband smiled from his Mercedes, watching his hired thugs destroy the last shred of dignity she owned. He'd already stolen her children through bought judges and false testimony. Tonight he wanted to erase the final witness to 12 years of abuse. What Adrian didn't know was that across the street, stepping out of an underground meeting where men decided who lived and died in this city, Lucien Moretti, the Mafia boss everyone feared but nobody dared name, had just watched the entire assault unfold. And something ancient and furious woke up inside him. If you want to see how a single moment of violence ignites a war that will burn through Chicago's criminal underworld, stay with this story until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to know how far this tale travels. Snow fell like dirty confetti through the financial district, where Adrian Voss's men finally let Selena collapse against a pharmacy wall after they'd finished reminding her what happened to women who threatened powerful men. Her ribs screamed with every shallow breath. The taste of copper filled her mouth. Somewhere 3 miles away, her children, Emma, 7, and Michael, 9, were sleeping in Adrian's mansion under the watch of hired nannies who reported Selena's every phone call, every desperate attempt to prove she wasn't the unfit mother the courts had declared her to be. The streets emptied fast this time of night. People who saw a bleeding woman slumped in a torn dress learned quickly in Chicago to keep walking, eyes forward, minds blank. Getting involved meant police reports. Police reports meant lawyers. Lawyers meant money most people didn't have, and trouble nobody wanted. Selena's vision blurred. She thought about her daughter's birthday next week. Thought about how Emma would blow out candles without her mother there. Thought about how many more years she could survive watching her children grow up through supervised visits in sterile family court waiting rooms. While Adrian smiled and the system protected him because men with money and political connections didn't lose custody battles to women who'd made the mistake of marrying monsters. She didn't notice the black armored SUV pulling up to the curb 20 feet away. Didn't see the 4 men in expensive suits and concealed weapons scanning the street with military precision. Didn't realize someone was watching her until footsteps stopped directly in front of where she sat shivering against brick. Lucien Moretti stood 6'2" with the kind of presence that made rooms go quiet without him speaking. At 38, he'd buried more enemies than most soldiers saw in combat. His tailored black overcoat probably cost more than Selena earned in 6 months back when she still had a job, before Adrian had her fired from 3 positions by threatening her employers. Gray eyes assessed her with the cold calculation of a man who'd learned early that showing weakness got you killed. Behind him, his head of security, a former Marine named Rico with scar tissue where his left ear used to be, shifted nervously. "Boss, we should move." The meeting ran long, and "Get the car warm," Lucien interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that ended arguments before they started. "And bring the first aid kit." Rico hesitated exactly 2 seconds before obeying. Lucien crouched down slowly, the way you approached injured animals that might bolt. Up close, Selena could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, the small scar cutting through his right eyebrow, the exhaustion buried so deep most people probably missed it. "You hurt bad?" he asked. Selena tried to speak. Her split lip cracked open fresh. She tasted blood again. "That's a stupid question," Lucien corrected himself. His jaw tightened. "Can you stand?" She wanted to say yes, wanted to prove she wasn't completely broken. But her legs had stopped responding to commands about 20 minutes ago when one of Adrian's men had kicked her hard enough that something in her left knee made a sound bones shouldn't make. Lucien saw the answer in her silence. Without asking permission, he slipped one arm behind her shoulders and another under her knees, lifting her like she weighed nothing. The sudden movement sent pain screaming through her ribs. She gasped. "I know," Lucien said quietly. "Breathe through it." He carried her to the SUV where Rico held the door open, his expression carefully neutral, the way good soldiers learn to be when their commander did something unexpected. The interior smelled like leather and gun oil. Heat poured from the vents. Lucien set her down on the back seat with surprising gentleness for a man whose hands looked like they'd broken faces. Rico climbed into the driver's seat. "Hospital?" "No." Selina forced out. Her voice came out ruined. No hospitals. Both men looked at her. He has people there, she explained, each word costing her. Adrian, he has people everywhere. Something dangerous flickered across Lucian's face. Adrian who? Voss. She watched recognition hit him like voltage. You know him. I know of him. Lucian's tone went flat. He's a middle management criminal pretending to be legitimate. Money laundering through real estate deals. Political donations buying protection from prosecution. The kind of man who hurts people weaker than him because actual dangerous men would put him in the ground. Selina almost laughed. It came out as a wet cough that made her ribs scream again. He took my children, convinced a judge I was unstable. Dangerous. She met Lucian's eyes. Do I look dangerous to you? You look like someone who survived something that should have killed you. He opened the first aid kit Rico had retrieved. That makes you more dangerous than most people walking around pretending they're tough. His hands moved efficiently, cleaning the cut on her lip with antiseptic that burned like fire, checking her pupils for concussion, prodding her ribs carefully enough that she only gasped twice. He'd done this before. Too many times, probably. What did you do to make him this angry? Lucien asked. I kept copies. Selina's voice steadied slightly. Financial records, emails, recordings. 12 years of evidence proving he's not the respectable businessman everyone thinks. I told him I'd release everything if he didn't let me see my children. And instead of negotiating, he tried to bury you. He tried to erase me, she corrected. There's a difference. Lucien sat back, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Outside, Chicago's downtown towers glittered against the night sky like broken glass. Inside the warm SUV, silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just heavy with decisions being weighed. You have somewhere safe to go? He finally asked. The question hurt worse than her ribs. No. Family? Friends? Adrian made sure everyone believes I'm mentally ill, delusional. You're the first person in 8 months who's looked at me like I'm actually here. Something shifted in Lucien's expression. For just a second, the cold calculation cracked, and she saw something raw underneath. Old pain, old fury, old helplessness that never quite healed. Take us to the Narcissus, he told Rico. Rico's eyes widened in the rearview mirror. Boss, I know what it is. The Narcissus was Lucien's flagship hotel in downtown Chicago. 35 stories of luxury that catered to foreign dignitaries, corporate executives, and anyone wealthy enough to afford rooms that cost more per night than most people's monthly rent. It was also, though few knew it, the nerve center of his actual operation, the empire of illegal gambling, controlled substances, political bribery, and contract enforcement that made him the most feared man in Chicago's criminal underground. Selina knew the hotel's reputation. Everyone did. I can't afford. You're not paying. Lucien's tone left no room for argument. And before you tell me you don't accept charity, understand something. This isn't charity. I don't do charity. Then what is it? He looked at her for a long moment. Insurance. The word hung between them like smoke. Against what? Against me forgetting there are still people in this city worth not being a monster for. The SUV pulled up to the Narcissus's private entrance, where valets materialized instantly, their faces carefully blank when they saw their boss carrying a bleeding woman through doors that opened onto marble floors and crystal chandeliers. A concierge started forward, then caught Lucien's expression and retreated fast. They took a private elevator that required a key card and a fingerprint scan. Selina watched the floors tick upward, past 20, past 30, past the highest floors regular guests could access. The doors opened onto a penthouse that occupied the entire 35th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, furniture that probably cost more than Selina's childhood home. Art on the walls that looked too expensive to be real, but obviously was. Everything gleamed with the particular kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. Lucien carried her past the living room to a bedroom suite larger than her old apartment. He set her down on a bed that felt like sleeping on clouds. Stay here tonight, he said. We'll talk in the morning about what happens next. I can't stay here. Even as she said it, her body betrayed her, sinking into the mattress like a drowning woman finding shore. You'll stay until you can walk without limping, until those ribs heal enough that breathing doesn't make you want to scream. His voice softened slightly. Until you remember what it feels like to sleep without being afraid someone's coming through the door. Tears burned behind Selina's eyes. She forced them back. Why are you doing this? Lucian was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old ghosts. When I was 8, my father was executed on the steps of St. Michael's Church for stealing from people he shouldn't have stolen from. My mother became collateral damage, debts she didn't owe, shame she didn't deserve, a life destroyed by choices someone else made. He looked out the window at Chicago's glittering skyline. I watched men walk past her on the street like she was already dead, like she didn't matter enough to see. He turned back to Selina. I swore I'd never walk past anyone the way those men walked past her. So when I saw you bleeding on that sidewalk, I didn't have a choice. His expression hardened. And when I learned Adrian Voss put you there, he stopped having choices too. The quiet certainty in his voice made something clear. Whatever came next, Adrian Voss had just made the worst mistake of his life. Morning arrived through floor-to-ceiling windows that turned Chicago's skyline into a watercolor of gold and gray. Selina woke to discover someone had left clean clothes folded on a chair, soft cotton pants, a white shirt, undergarments still in packaging. Everything fit perfectly, which meant someone had estimated her size last night and sent staff shopping before dawn. The bathroom was ridiculous. Heated marble floors, a shower with 6 different heads. Toiletries that probably cost more than her old monthly grocery budget. She stood underwater hot enough to hurt, watching diluted pink swirl down the drain, and tried to remember the last time she'd felt clean. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a robe that cost more than professional cleaning products, a woman waited in the bedroom. Mid-50s, efficient posture, the kind of competence that came from years of managing other people's lives. "Good morning, Ms. Reyes." The woman's voice was warm but professional. "I'm Margaret, Mr. Moretti's executive assistant. He asked me to check on you." "I'm fine." Selina's ribs disagreed loudly. Margaret's expression said she'd been managing stubborn people for decades and wasn't impressed. "Mr. Moretti's personal physician will be here in an hour. In the meantime, breakfast is ready in the dining room whenever you're comfortable." "I should probably leave." "With respect, ma'am, Mr. Moretti was very clear about your status here." Margaret's tone stayed polite but firm. "You're a guest under his personal protection. That means you go where you want, when you want, with appropriate security. It also means anyone who tells you otherwise will be explaining themselves to him directly." The weight of that settled over Selina like armor she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. She dressed carefully, every movement reminding her that Adrian's men had been thorough. When she made it to the dining room, she found Lucien sitting at a long table reading 3 different newspapers and drinking black coffee. He wore a dark gray suit that probably cost more than a used car. His hair was slightly damp from a shower. He looked up when she entered. "Sit," he said simply, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Margaret says you're refusing medical attention." "I don't need—" "You need x-rays for those ribs. Probably stitches for the cut on your scalp I missed last night because your hair was covering it." He folded one newspaper and picked up another. "Doctor will be here at 9. He's discreet." "I can't afford—" "That's the second time you've mentioned money." Lucien looked at her over the top of the paper. "Stop it." A staff member materialized with food: eggs, toast, fresh fruit, orange juice. The smell made Selina's stomach clench with hunger she'd been ignoring for so long it felt dangerous to acknowledge. She ate. It was embarrassing how fast she ate, how her body responded to the first real meal in days. Lucien didn't comment, just kept reading his newspapers while she quietly demolished everything on her plate. "Adrian Voss, Lucien," Lucien said eventually, setting down the business section, "has been on my radar for about 6 months. He's laundering money for the Calabrese family through commercial real estate deals. Small-time operation, but they're trying to expand into territory that belongs to me." He sipped his coffee. "Until last night, he wasn't worth the trouble of removing." Selina's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "What changed?" "He touched something that belongs to me now." "I don't belong to—" "You misunderstand." Lucien's gray eyes were calm but absolute. "I decided you're under my protection. That makes you mine in the only way that matters in this city. It means anyone who hurts you is declaring war on me. The casual certainty in his voice should have been terrifying. Instead, for the first time in months, Selina felt something other than helpless. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now I make some phone calls and find out exactly how deep Adrian's connections run." He stood, buttoning his jacket with the practiced ease of someone who wore armor disguised as business attire. "You heal, you rest, you let the doctor fix what those animals broke." "And then?" Lucian smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "Then Adrian Voss learns the difference between hurting women who have nowhere to turn and hurting one who just acquired the most dangerous protection in Chicago." He left her sitting at the table, surrounded by wealth and safety that felt fragile as spider silk. Because Selina had learned the hard way that safety was just an illusion, powerful people allowed you to believe until they decided otherwise. Sets. The doctor arrived at 9 sharp. Dr. Chen was maybe 60, with steady hands and the kind of quiet competence that came from years of treating injuries without asking questions. He examined Selina thoroughly in the bedroom suite, while Margaret supervised. 2 cracked ribs, Dr. Chen announced. Mild concussion. Extensive bruising that'll look worse before it looks better. The knee is strained but not torn. You'll need to stay off it for a week. He cleaned and bandaged the scalp cut with practiced efficiency. "You're lucky. Another few inches to the left, and that blow would have fractured your skull." Lucky. The word tasted bitter. He left pain medication and instructions. Margaret promised to check on her every few hours. Then Selina was alone in a penthouse that cost more to maintain for 1 month than she'd earned in a year, wearing borrowed clothes, protected by a man she'd met 12 hours ago, while somewhere across the city her children woke up in Adrian's mansion believing their mother had abandoned them. She limped to the window and stared out at Chicago's sprawl. From up here, the city looked clean, orderly, the kind of place where bad things didn't happen to people minding their own business. From up here, you couldn't see the blood on the sidewalks. Her phone, which someone had retrieved from the scene along with her small purse, buzzed with a text. Unknown number. "You made a mistake involving Moretti. I know men who will make him bleed. Give me what you took from me, and maybe I'll let you see your children again before I bury you properly. Adrian." Always so certain he held all the power. Before she could respond, her phone rang. Her lawyer, the public defender who'd given up trying months ago. "Ms. Reyes." Jennifer Watts sounded stunned. "I need you to sit down." "I'm sitting." "The custody case." Jennifer took an audible breath. "It's been reopened. Emergency motion filed by the state attorney's office based on new evidence suggesting fraud, witness tampering, and judicial misconduct in the original proceedings." Selina's vision swam. "What evidence?" "Someone delivered copies of financial records, communication logs, and sworn affidavits from 3 of your ex-husband's former employees detailing years of systematic witness intimidation and bribery." Jennifer's voice climbed with barely contained excitement. "Whoever compiled this spent serious money on forensic accounting and private investigation. The evidence is so comprehensive that 2 judges have already recused themselves, and the state's opened a criminal investigation into Adrian's business dealings." "When did this happen?" "The filing hit the court system at 8:30 this morning. 2 hours ago, right after Lucian left the dining room to make phone calls." "There's more," Jennifer continued. "An anonymous donor established a legal defense fund in your name, $200,000. I'm authorized to hire expert witnesses, private investigators, whatever we need." She paused. "Selina, who did you call?" "I didn't call anyone." "Then someone with serious resources just went to war for you." They talked for another 10 minutes about next steps, timeline, what this meant. When Selina finally hung up, her hands were shaking so hard she dropped the phone twice. The penthouse doors opened. Lucien entered, followed by Rico and another man Selina hadn't met. Shorter, wiry build, eyes that cataloged everything in seconds. The new guy carried himself like violence barely contained. "Selina, this is Marco," Lucian said. "My second. If I'm not available, you listen to him." Marco nodded once. No smile, no pretense of warmth, just cold assessment. "My lawyer called," Selina said. Her voice sounded distant. "Someone reopened my custody case. Someone gave her evidence. Someone established a legal fund." "Good." Lucian shrugged out of his jacket. "The evidence was always there. Adrian just made sure nobody looked. You did this morning. I made phone calls. He loosened his tie like they were discussing restaurant reservations instead of dismantling a man's life. I have people who are very good at finding things other people try to hide. I can't afford to pay you back for... This isn't a transaction. Lucian's tone went sharp. I don't loan money to people in your situation because people in your situation get crushed trying to repay debts they can't afford. The fund is a gift. The legal team is a gift. The security keeping you alive is a gift. He moved closer. The only thing I'm asking in return is that you stop assuming everyone who helps you wants something. Selina opened her mouth, closed it. 12 years of marriage to Adrian had taught her that help always came with hooks. I don't understand why you're doing this, she whispered. Lucien was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried old pain. 28 years ago, my mother froze to death in an alley 3 blocks from here. She'd been sleeping rough for 6 weeks because debts I couldn't pay destroyed her reputation, and my father's execution left her with nothing. He looked past Selina, out at the city. I was 10 years old, living in a group home, and I couldn't protect her, couldn't save her, could barely remember what she looked like by the time I was old enough to come looking for her grave. Eats. He turned back. So when I see a woman bleeding on a sidewalk because a man with money and connections decided she doesn't matter, I remember watching people step over my mother like she was already dead. And I make different choices than those people made. The rawness in his admission made Selina's chest ache worse than her cracked ribs. Adrian threatened you this morning, Lucien added, his tone shifting back to business. Sent you a text saying he knows people who will make me bleed. How did you... She stopped. Of course, his people were monitoring her phone. Adrian Voss is a mid-level criminal who pays the Calabrese family for protection because alone he's nothing. Lucian's expression went cold. He thinks threatening me will make you surrender whatever evidence you kept. Instead, he just moved himself from minor problem to immediate priority. Rico cleared his throat. Boss, the thing we discussed is handled. Lucien glanced at his watch. Selina, I need you to do exactly what I tell you for the next 72 hours. Don't leave this floor. Don't contact anyone outside without clearing it through Marco first. Don't trust anyone who isn't vetted by my people. What's happening in 72 hours? Adrian's going to realize he miscalculated. Lucien smiled, but it was the kind of smile that preceded funerals. And the Calabrese family is going to learn what happens when their assets become liabilities. 2 days passed in the strange suspension of penthouse lockdown. Selina healed slowly, ribs hurt less, bruises shifted from purple to green-yellow, the limp faded to something manageable. Dr. Chen returned twice to check her progress. Margaret kept her company, teaching her the difference between expensive coffee and really expensive coffee, telling sanitized stories about working for Lucien that carefully avoided mentioning anything illegal. At night, Selina couldn't sleep despite the comfortable bed and complete safety. She'd stare at the ceiling and think about her children. Wonder what Emma was doing, whether Michael remembered what her voice sounded like, whether they believed the lies Adrian had told them about their mother. On the 3rd morning, Lucien summoned her to his office on the 30th floor. The space was all dark wood, leather chairs, and windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. A conference table held 3 laptops, 2 cell phones, and what looked like surveillance photos. Rico and Marco were already there. So was a woman Selina didn't recognize. Late 30s, sharp business suit, the kind of attractive that came from expensive maintenance. She looked at Selina the way wolves assessed potential prey. This is Viviana De Luca, Lucien said, my former fiancée. She handles certain business interests on the north side. Former fiancée. The emphasis was slight but deliberate. Viviana smiled without warmth. So, you're the stray he dragged home. Viviana, Lucien's voice carried a warning. What? I'm being friendly. She turned to Lucien. I heard you're dismantling Adrian Voss for hurting this woman you barely know. People are talking, Lucien, wondering if you're getting soft. Let them wonder. He gestured for Selina to sit. Update? Marco opened one of the laptops. Calabrese is getting nervous. Adrian's been trying to contact them for 2 days and they're freezing him out. They don't want war with us over someone who's quickly becoming a liability. Good. Keep the pressure steady. Lucien turned to Selena. Your custody hearing is tomorrow at 2 p.m. My legal team has the entire case locked down. Jennifer Watts has been briefed. You'll testify. The judge will review the new evidence. Adrian's lawyers will try to stall, but they won't succeed. What if he tries something? Selena asked. He won't. Lucien's certainty was absolute. Because starting tomorrow morning, Adrian Voss is going to be too busy trying to avoid federal prosecution to worry about you. Viviana leaned against the conference table. You're really doing all this for someone you met 3 days ago? I'm doing this because it's the right move strategically. Lucien didn't look at her. Adrian was operating in my territory without permission. The custody case gave me leverage. Everything else is just cleaning up loose ends. It was a reasonable explanation, practical, strategic. It was also obviously a lie. Viviana saw it too. Her expression went carefully neutral, but something dark flickered behind her eyes. The meeting continued. Logistics about tomorrow, security protocols, contingency plans if things went sideways. Selena absorbed about half of it, her attention splitting between the professional efficiency of Lucien's operation and the tension radiating off Viviana like heat shimmer. When everyone filed out except Lucien and Selena, the silence felt heavy. Viviana doesn't like me, Selena said. Viviana doesn't like anyone who has my attention. We were engaged 4 years ago. It was a strategic arrangement between families. When I called it off, she didn't handle it well. She still works for you? She runs legitimate businesses that generate legitimate income. It's easier to keep her close where I can watch her than cut her loose and wonder what she's doing. He looked tired suddenly. Politics in my world are complicated. Is she dangerous? Everyone in my world is dangerous. He met Selena's eyes. But you're under my protection. That means even Viviana won't touch you. The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, Selena felt something cold settle in her stomach because she'd learned the hard way that the most dangerous threats always came from the places you thought were safe. That night, sleep refused to come. Selena stood at the penthouse windows watching Chicago's lights blur through gathering fog and thought about tomorrow, about facing Adrian in court, about seeing her children again after 8 months of supervised visits and carefully monitored phone calls, about the impossible fact that a man she'd known less than a week had upended her entire life. Behind her, the penthouse doors opened quietly. She turned to find Lucien entering, still dressed but with his tie gone and sleeves rolled up. He looked exhausted in a way expensive suits usually hid. Can't sleep? He asked. Too much thinking. He moved to the bar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if she wanted one. Handed her one. She took it. They stood in silence, drinking expensive liquor and watching the city breathe. What happens after tomorrow? Selena finally asked. You get your children back. Adrian faces criminal charges. Your life returns to something resembling normal. He sipped his drink. And I return to being the monster everyone expects me to be. You're not a monster. You've known me 4 days. You have no idea what I am. His voice was flat. I've killed people, Selena. Ordered deaths. Destroyed families to protect my interests. I run an empire built on violence and fear and every terrible thing people do when nobody's watching. And yet you stopped your car to help someone bleeding on a sidewalk. That doesn't make me good. It makes me inconsistent. She turned to face him fully. Why did you really call off the engagement with Viviana? Lucien was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I looked at her and realized I was becoming my father, forming alliances through marriage, building power through family connections, treating people like assets instead of... He stopped, started again. She deserved someone who wanted her for more than strategic value. I deserved to stop pretending I could be the man my father wanted me to be. What man did your father want you to be? Cold? Calculating? Willing to sacrifice anything for power? He finished his whiskey. Turns out I'm good at 2 of those 3 things. Which one are you bad at? Before he could answer, both their phones buzzed simultaneously. Lucien checked his first. His expression went deadly. What? Selena demanded. He showed her the screen. Security alert from the hotel's command center, multiple vehicles approaching the building, armed men identified. Facial recognition flagged them as Calabrese family soldiers. They're coming here? Selena's voice climbed. Why would they? Because someone told them you were hiding here. Lucian was already moving, pressing buttons on his phone. Someone gave them access codes and floor plans. His face went dark with fury. Someone inside my organization. Rico's voice crackled through the phone's speaker. Boss, we've got at least 15 hostiles entering through the service entrance. More surrounding the building. They're not even trying to be subtle. Lock down all elevators except the private car. Get every civilian guest to shelter in place. Pull all security to defensive positions. Lucian grabbed Selena's arm. You're coming with me. Now. They ran toward the private elevator. Behind them, the sound of gunfire erupted somewhere far below, muffled by distance and expensive construction, but unmistakable. The war Adrian had threatened just arrived at Lucian's door, and somewhere in the building, someone who was supposed to be loyal had just betrayed them both. The private elevator dropped like a stone while gunfire echoed through the Narcissus's lower floors. Lucian's hand stayed locked around Selena's wrist, his grip tight enough to bruise. His other hand held his phone pressed to his ear while Rico's voice crackled through updates that got worse with every passing second. They breached the 23rd floor. Our guys are holding, but we're outnumbered. Fall back to the 16th, Lucian ordered. His voice stayed level, but Selena could feel the tension radiating off him like electricity. Funnel them into the conference wing. I want them boxed in where civilian exposure is minimal. Boss, they're asking for her by name. They know she's here. Selena's stomach dropped. The elevator lurched to a stop on the 18th floor, a private level used for storage and maintenance that most people didn't know existed. The doors opened onto harsh fluorescent lighting and concrete walls. No luxury here, just the bones of the building stripped of pretense. Marco waited with 3 other men, all armed, all wearing the kind of calm that came from seeing violence so often it stopped being special. Behind them stood Viviana, her expensive dress completely out of place against the industrial backdrop. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp. What the hell is she doing here? Lucian demanded. She was in the building when the alert went out, Marco said. Protocol says, I don't care about protocol. Get her to the armored car in the underground garage. Lucian turned to Viviana. Go home. Lock your doors. Don't come back until I call you. You're protecting her. Viviana's voice was ice. She stared at Selena with open hatred. You're willing to start a war over some woman you found bleeding on a street corner. What I'm willing to do isn't your concern anymore. Lucian's tone went dangerous. Marco, get her out of here. Now. Marco moved toward Viviana, but she stepped back, her expression twisting into something ugly. They're here because of her, Viviana said. Because you made Adrian Voss's problem your problem. Because you can't stop yourself from playing hero for broken things you think you can fix. Viviana, how long before she destroys everything you built? How long before caring about her gets you killed? The question hung in the concrete space like smoke. Around them, the muffled sound of gunfire continued somewhere above. Someone was screaming. Security alarms wailed through the building's bones. Lucian's jaw tightened. If I wanted your opinion on who I protect, I'd have asked for it 4 years ago when it might have mattered. Marco, remove her. Marco grabbed Viviana's arm. She jerked away, but 2 of the other men moved in, their faces showing nothing. They escorted her toward the service elevator on the opposite side of the floor. Viviana looked back once, her expression promising consequences. Then she was gone. That's going to be a problem later, Marco muttered. Later. Lucian pulled Selena toward a heavy steel door. Right now we have 15 armed men hunting through my hotel asking for a woman under my protection. Where's Rico? 14th floor. They're holding, but ammunition's getting tight. Tell him to pull everyone back to the 12th and seal it. No one gets past that line. He pushed through the steel door into a stairwell that smelled like rust and old paint. We're going down to the sublevel. There's a tunnel that connects to the building next door. We can move Selena out through there. They descended fast, boots echoing on metal stairs. Selena's ribs screamed with every jarring step, but she bit down on the pain and kept moving because stopping meant dying, and she'd survived too much to die in a stairwell running from men whose faces she'd never see. 3 floors down, the stairwell door above them crashed open. Voices shouted in Italian, footsteps pounded downward. Move faster, Lucian said quietly. Not panicked, just stating facts. They hit the sublevel and burst through another steel door into a tunnel that looked like something from a war bunker. Exposed pipes ran along low ceilings. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly yellow. The air tasted like mold and machinery. Behind them, the stairwell door exploded inward. 3 men poured through, weapons raised. Marco and the other soldiers opened fire without hesitation. The sound in the enclosed space was deafening. Selina's ears rang. Lucian shoved her behind him, his body becoming a shield, while he pulled a gun from somewhere inside his jacket and fired twice with the calm precision of someone who'd done this too many times to count. One of the attacking men went down. The other 2 ducked behind a support column. "Go!" Marco shouted. "We'll hold them!" Lucian grabbed Selina and ran. The tunnel stretched ahead like a throat. More gunfire erupted behind them. Someone screamed. Selina didn't look back, because looking back meant seeing which of Lucian's men had just died protecting her, and she couldn't carry that weight while her legs were barely holding her upright. They crashed through a door at the tunnel's end into another building's basement, this one belonging to an office tower Lucian apparently also owned. The space was dark except for red emergency lighting. Somewhere above them, the Narcissus continued bleeding. Lucian's phone buzzed. He answered without stopping. "Talk to me." Rico's voice sounded strained. "They're pulling back. Whoever ordered this wanted to send a message, not actually take the building. We've got 4 casualties on our side, at least 7 on theirs." Calabrese? Had to be. Nobody else moves that many soldiers through downtown Chicago without their approval. Which means they're done protecting Adrian. Lucian's expression was carved stone. They just threw him to the wolves and tried to collect his debt in blood. He hung up and turned to Selina. In the red emergency lighting, his face looked demonic. "You still have those financial records you mentioned? The evidence Adrian wanted buried?" "It's all encrypted on a drive hidden in a storage unit across town. Why?" "Because we're going to finish what you started." His voice was cold enough to freeze blood. "Adrian wanted you erased. The Calabrese family wanted to prove they could touch me inside my own territory. They both just made terminal mistakes." They took a service elevator to the underground garage where an armored SUV waited with the engine running. The driver, a woman Selina hadn't seen before with military posture and a visible shoulder holster, nodded once at Lucian. "Where to, boss?" "The Southside storage facility. Then we're paying a visit to Adrian Voss." They pulled out into Chicago's pre-dawn streets. Behind them, police sirens converged on the Narcissus, while Lucian made phone calls in rapid-fire Italian that Selina couldn't follow, but understood meant violence was being organized with surgical precision. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Adrenaline crashed through her system in waves that made her teeth chatter. Lucian noticed, reached across the seat, and took her hand. His palm was warm and solid and completely steady. "You're going to be okay," he said quietly. "People died tonight because of me. People died tonight because the Calabrese family made a tactical decision to side with a man who beats women and then tried to use violence to collect a debt I never owed them." His grip tightened slightly. "You didn't cause this. You're just the excuse they used." "That's the same thing." "No, it's not." He looked at her with those gray eyes that had seen too much and somehow still found room for kindness. "You asked Adrian for your children back. He responded with violence. I responded to his violence by protecting you. The Calabrese family responded to my protection by attacking my territory. Each step was a choice someone made. The only person in this chain who didn't choose violence was you." The logic was clean, simple, completely irrelevant to the guilt crushing her chest. They drove in silence through streets beginning to wake up for another day. Early morning commuters mixed with late-night survivors. The city looked normal if you didn't know that less than an hour ago, men had killed each other in a luxury hotel while guests hid behind locked doors and prayed not to become collateral damage. The storage facility was a grim concrete building in a neighborhood where nobody asked questions. Selina directed them to Unit 237 on the 3rd floor. She unlocked it with a key she kept on a chain around her neck, the only thing Adrian's men hadn't taken from her that night on the sidewalk. Inside the small unit sat 3 boxes. That was it. 12 years of marriage and evidence of crimes reduced to 3 cardboard boxes that smelled like dust and old paper. Selina pulled out the encrypted drive from where she'd hidden it inside a hollowed-out book. The book was a Bible. She'd bought it specifically because Adrian would never touch it. He'd been too superstitious about that kind of symbolism to search somewhere marked with religious significance, even though he'd never actually practiced anything resembling faith. "This is everything?" Lucien asked. Bank records showing money laundering through shell corporations, emails detailing bribes to judges and city officials, recordings of Adrian admitting to fraud and witness intimidation, documented evidence of abuse that his lawyers somehow convinced the court to throw out as inadmissible. Her voice shook. "I've been collecting it for 7 years, since the first time he hit me, and I realized nobody was going to help me unless I could prove absolutely everything." Lucien took the drive carefully, like it was made of explosives. "You've been planning your escape for 7 years?" "I've been planning to survive for 7 years. There's a difference." Something shifted in his expression, respect maybe, or recognition. "You're smarter than Adrian ever realized." "If I was smart, I wouldn't have married him in the first place." "You were 22 when you married him. He was 38 with money and connections and a face he showed the world that looked nothing like the man he was in private." Lucien's voice was matter-of-fact. "That's not you being stupid. That's him being a predator who knew exactly how to hunt." They returned to the SUV with the evidence. Dawn was breaking properly now, turning Chicago's skyline into sharp silhouettes against pale gray sky. The city looked clean in early light. Innocent. The kind of place where bad things happen to other people. "Where does Adrian live?" Lucien asked. Selina gave him the address. One of those massive homes in Lincoln Park where old money and new crime mixed together until nobody could tell the difference anymore. The driver headed north while Lucien made more calls. "I want 8 men at that location in 20 minutes, he said into the phone. "No, I don't care if they just came off rotation. I want Adrian Voss contained but breathing, and I want it done clean, no witnesses, no complications, no excuses." He hung up and looked at Selina. "You don't have to come inside for this part." "Yes, I do." "Selina, but that's all. Those are my children in that house." Her voice came out harder than she'd ever heard it. "I've missed 8 months of their lives. I've cried myself unconscious, wondering if they hate me for abandoning them, even though I never chose to leave. I've imagined scenarios where Adrian convinces them I'm dead or crazy or dangerous until they can't remember what I actually was to them." She met his eyes. "So yes, I'm going inside. You can't stop me." Lucien studied her for a long moment. "Okay, but you follow my lead. You do exactly what I say, and if things go wrong, you run and don't look back. Understood?" "Understood." They pulled up to Adrian's house as the sun finally crested the horizon. The home was ridiculous. 3 stories of architectural excess with manicured lawns and gates that probably cost more than Selina's entire childhood. 2 cars sat in the circular driveway. Lights were on in several windows. Inside, her children were probably eating breakfast, getting ready for school, living lives that didn't include her. Lucien's men were already in position. She could see them through the SUV's windows, shadows near the gates, figures moving around the perimeter with military efficiency. They'd surrounded the house so quickly and quietly that anyone inside probably didn't know they were trapped yet. Lucien's phone buzzed. He read the message and smiled without humor. "Adrian's awake. He's in the kitchen. The nanny is giving the children breakfast upstairs. 3 other adults in the house, probably security." "How do you know all that?" "Because I own half this city and the other half works for people who owe me favors." He opened the SUV door. "Stay close. Don't speak unless I tell you to. If shooting starts, hit the ground and cover your head." They walked up the driveway like they owned the place. Because in a very real sense, Lucien did own the place. He owned the city, which meant he owned everyone in it who wasn't strong enough to tell him no. The front door wasn't even locked. They walked straight in. The interior was exactly what Selina expected. Expensive furniture that looked uncomfortable. Art that was purchased for value rather than beauty. Everything designed to impress rather than live in. She'd spent 12 years hating this house, and everything it represented. They found Adrian in the kitchen exactly where Lucien's intelligence said he'd be. He was drinking coffee and reading something on his tablet, dressed in a silk robe that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 46, he'd kept himself fit through personal trainers and careful vanity. His dark hair was graying at the temples in a way magazines would call distinguished. He'd always been handsome in that polished, artificial way that hid the rot underneath. He looked up when they entered. For one beautiful second, confusion crossed his face, then recognition, then fear. "Good morning, Adrian." Lucien's voice was pleasant, conversational. the tone you'd use discussing weather. We need to talk about your recent business decisions. Adrian's hand moved toward his phone. One of Lucian's men materialized behind him and placed a gun against the back of his head. Not threatening, just informative. I wouldn't, the soldier said politely. Adrian froze. His eyes found Selina standing behind Lucian. Something ugly twisted across his face. Rage mixed with disbelief, mixed with the first real understanding that the power he'd wielded over her for 12 years had just evaporated. You brought him here, Adrian said. His voice shook. You brought a mafia boss into my home. You beat me unconscious and left me bleeding on a sidewalk, Selina replied. Her voice was steady now, calm. Then you threatened the man who saved my life. Then you sent armed men to kill us both. So yes, I brought him here. And now you're going to give me back my children. Like hell. Lucian moved fast. 1 second he was standing calmly. The next his hand was wrapped around Adrian's throat, slamming him back against the kitchen counter hard enough that the tablet clattered to the floor. His face was inches from Adrian's, his voice dropping to something that barely qualified as human. You're going to listen very carefully because I'm only going to explain this once, Lucian said. The Calabrese family has decided you're more trouble than you're worth. They attacked my territory last night trying to eliminate a problem you created and failed. That means you have zero protection left, zero leverage, zero power. He tightened his grip slightly. Adrian's face started turning red. The only reason you're still breathing is because I'm deciding right now whether killing you is worth the paperwork or if destroying your life completely serves my interests better. He released Adrian, who collapsed against the counter gasping. Here's what's going to happen, Lucian continued. You're going to sign custody of your children back to their mother immediately. You're going to turn yourself in to federal authorities on charges of money laundering, bribery, and witness tampering. You're going to allocate every dollar of your legitimate assets to a trust fund for those children's education and your ex-wife's living expenses. He pulled out his phone and showed Adrian something on the screen. And if you even think about fighting any of this, I'll release your financial records to every news outlet in Chicago, along with recordings of you arranging violence against women and children. Your choice: prison with the possibility of parole in 15 years, or prison plus your reputation destroyed so completely that even other criminals will spit when they hear your name. Bull. Adrian's face had gone from red to white. You can't. I already did. Your bank accounts are frozen as of 6 this morning. Your business partners are already distancing themselves. Your lawyers received notice an hour ago that federal prosecutors have enough evidence to guarantee conviction. Lucian's smile was surgical. You're done, Adrian. The only question is whether you go quietly or if I have to make it hurt. The kitchen filled with horrible silence. Upstairs, Selina could hear her children's voices, Emma's laugh, Michael's response. They sounded happy, healthy, completely unaware that their entire world was about to change. I want to see them, Selina said quietly. I want to see my children. Adrian looked at her with naked hatred. You're going to regret this. Probably. She moved closer. But at least I'll regret it while watching my kids grow up. You'll regret it in a prison cell wondering how a woman you spent 12 years crushing became the reason you lost everything. Before Adrian could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs. The nanny appeared, a middle-aged woman whose face went pale when she saw the scene in the kitchen. Behind her came Emma and Michael, already dressed for school, backpacks over their shoulders. Emma saw Selina first. Her little face, so much older than 8 months ago, went through confusion, recognition, and then something that broke Selina's heart into pieces. Hope. Mommy? Emma's voice was tiny, uncertain, like she'd been taught not to trust that word anymore. Selina's knees almost gave out. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out because what do you say to a daughter who thinks you abandoned her? How do you explain that you never stopped fighting even when everyone said you'd already lost? Hi, baby, she finally whispered. I missed you so much. Michael, older, more guarded, hung back. His expression was closed off in a way that hadn't been there before. Adrian had spent 8 months poisoning them against her. She could see it in how Michael wouldn't meet her eyes. What's going on? The nanny asked nervously. Mr. Voss, should I take the children back upstairs? Adrian said. No. Lucien's voice cut through the room like a blade. Actually, You should pack their belongings. They're leaving with their mother today. The nanny looked between Lucian and Adrian, trying to calculate which order would get her killed. Smart woman. She chose Lucian. Right away, sir. She herded Emma and Michael back toward the stairs. Emma looked back once, her expression confused and hopeful and terrified all at once. Then they were gone. Adrian sagged against the counter. All the fight had drained out of him, leaving just a middle-aged man in an expensive robe who'd finally run out of people to buy and violence to hide behind. I loved them, he said quietly. They're my children. You loved controlling them, Selina corrected. There's a difference. Real love doesn't involve using children as weapons. Real love doesn't mean destroying their mother's reputation just to prove you can. And what is this? Adrian gestured at Lucian. Using mafia violence to take them back? How is that better? Because I'm not using violence, Selina said. I'm using the truth. Every piece of evidence I collected, every recording, every financial document, that's what's destroying you, Adrian, not Lucian's guns, your own crimes. The distinction seemed to matter to her even if nobody else cared. 20 minutes later, Emma and Michael came back downstairs with suitcases packed by the nanny. Emma ran to Selina immediately, throwing small arms around her mother's waist and holding on like she'd never let go. Michael stayed back, his expression still guarded, but when Selina held out her hand, he took it after a long hesitation. Are we really leaving? Emma asked. Yes, baby, we're really leaving. Is Daddy coming? Selina looked at Adrian, who was signing documents that Lucian's lawyer had produced from nowhere. Custody transfers, asset allocations, confessions typed up with legal precision. No, Selina said gently. Daddy has to stay here and fix some mistakes he made. They walked out of that house into morning sunshine that felt too bright and too clean. The children climbed into the armored SUV with wonder on their faces because they'd never ridden in anything like it. Emma peppered Selina with questions. Where were they going? Where had she been? Why did Daddy look so scared? Who was the tall man in the expensive suit? Michael stayed quiet, but he didn't let go of Selina's hand. Behind them, Adrian Voss stood in the doorway of his beautiful house, watching everything he'd built collapse. By afternoon, federal agents would arrive with warrants. By evening, news outlets would be running stories about corruption and abuse. By next week, he'd be in prison wondering how a woman he'd thrown away became the instrument of his complete destruction. But right now, Selina held her children and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. They drove back toward downtown Chicago. Lucian made quiet phone calls in the front seat, while Emma fell asleep against Selina's shoulder, and Michael slowly started asking careful questions about where they were going to live. Somewhere safe, Selina promised. Somewhere nobody can hurt us anymore. She looked up to find Lucian watching her in the rearview mirror. Something passed between them. Understanding maybe, or recognition that they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He'd upended his empire's stability for her. She'd walked into his world knowing it was built on violence and blood. Neither of them were innocent anymore. But her children were breathing. They were together. That had to count for something. The SUV pulled up to a building Selina didn't recognize. Expensive, but understated, the kind of place where wealthy people lived anonymously. Lucian led them inside to a furnished apartment on the 8th floor with views of Lake Michigan and security that would have stopped a military assault. This is yours for as long as you need it, he said. 24-hour security, private entrance, everything paid for. I can't accept. Yes, you can. His voice was gentle. Your custody hearing is tomorrow. You need somewhere stable to bring your children home to. After that, we'll figure out next steps. But right now, you need to sleep and let them readjust to having their mother back. Emma was already exploring the apartment with wonder. Michael hung back near Selina, still guarded but gradually softening. Lucien watched them with an expression that was hard to read, satisfaction maybe, or something deeper. Thank you, Selina said quietly, for everything. Don't thank me yet. His expression darkened. The Calabrese family attacked my territory. That requires a response. Things are going to get complicated over the next few days. Violent, probably. I need you to stay here where you're protected until I clean up this mess. How violent? Very. He didn't lie to her. She appreciated that. But none of it will touch you or your children. That's a promise. He left her there with her children and guards, who moved like shadows. Emma fell asleep on the couch, clutching her mother's hand. Michael eventually sat close enough that their shoulders touched. Outside, Chicago glittered in afternoon sun, completely unaware that a war was brewing in its criminal underground. Selena should have felt safe, should have felt grateful. Instead, she felt the weight of everything Lucien had done, the violence ordered, the lives destroyed, the empire shaken, and wondered what price they'd all pay for her survival. What? That night, after her children were asleep in their new bedrooms, Selena stood at the window, watching city lights blur into patterns. Her phone rang. Jennifer Watts, her lawyer. "The hearing tomorrow is a formality," Jennifer said, excitement barely contained. "Adrian signed everything. The judge has reviewed the evidence. Unless something goes catastrophically wrong, you'll have full custody reinstated by end of day." "That's good," Selena said distantly. "That's better than good. That's a miracle." Jennifer paused. "Are you okay?" "I don't know what I am anymore." After she hung up, Selena pulled out her phone and scrolled through news feeds. The Narcissus attack was everywhere. Gang violence erupts in downtown luxury hotel, multiple casualties in apparent organized crime dispute, police investigating coordinated assault. Nobody mentioned Lucien by name. Nobody said Mafia Boss. The news treated it like random violence between nameless criminals. But Selena knew better. She knew exactly who'd ordered that attack and why. Knew that men had died protecting her. Knew that Lucien had declared war on another crime family because someone had beaten her up and left her bleeding. Knew that she'd walked into his world and let him reshape her life through violence, and she'd accepted it because the alternative was losing her children forever. The moral mathematics didn't work out to anything clean. Her phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number, but she recognized the writing style. "Viviana knows where you are. She's angry and connected and smarter than Lucien gives her credit for. Watch your back. No signature, no follow-up. Just a warning from someone who apparently had her number and reason to believe Lucien's ex-fiancée was dangerous." Selena stood at the window holding her phone and watching Chicago sparkle and wondered how many more people were going to get hurt before this was over. She wondered if her children would ever forgive her for what she'd let happen to get them back. She wondered if she'd ever forgive herself. Across the city, in his penthouse office at the Narcissus, Lucien Moretti sat alone reviewing casualty reports and damage assessments. 4 of his men dead, 7 wounded, 12 Calabrese soldiers killed or captured. The building had taken millions in damage. Insurance would cover some of it. The rest came out of operations budgets that were already stretched thin from territorial disputes and federal attention. Rico stood nearby, exhausted and bloodied, but alive. The Calabrese family sent a message through intermediaries. They want to sit down. Neutral ground. They're claiming the attack was unauthorized, rogue elements acting without approval. They're lying. Of course they're lying, but they're also scared. We hurt them bad last night. They didn't expect us to be that prepared. Lucien stared out at the city he controlled, or thought he controlled, until someone decided to challenge him in his own territory. Set up the meeting, but make it clear that this isn't negotiation. This is them hearing terms of their surrender. Boss, if we push too hard, they came into my building asking for a woman under my personal protection. They tried to kill her in front of me. There's no version of this where they don't pay in blood. His voice was ice. The only question is how much blood they're willing to lose before they accept that. Rico was quiet for a moment. This is about more than territory, isn't it? What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you're fighting a war over a woman you met less than a week ago. People are noticing. Viviana is spreading rumors that you're compromised. Some of the families are wondering if you're still thinking clearly. Lucien turned from the window. Are you questioning my judgment? I'm questioning whether protecting her is worth what it's going to cost us. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Rico immediately recognized his mistake, but it was too late to pull the words back. Get out, Lucien said quietly. Boss, I didn't mean... I said get out. Rico left quickly. The door clicked shut. Lucien stood alone in his office, surrounded by luxury and power and everything he'd built over 20 years of violence and calculation. And for the first time in his adult life, he wondered if Rico might be right. If protecting Selena was worth the price everyone around him was paying. If caring about someone made you weak, or if it made you finally worth something beyond fear. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Viviana is planning something. She blames the woman for everything. Thought you should know. A friend. Lucien stared at the message for a long time. Then he made a phone call that would change everything. I need you to bring Viviana to me, he said into the phone. Tonight. And make sure nobody sees you do it. Across town in her penthouse apartment, Viviana De Luca poured expensive wine and made plans that involved betrayal, revenge, and the complete destruction of a woman who'd stolen the only thing Viviana had ever actually wanted, Lucien's attention. She didn't know yet that Lucien's people were already on their way. Didn't know that the message she'd sent to the Calabrese family, revealing Selina's location, had been intercepted and traced back to her. Didn't know that every decision she'd made over the past 4 days had been monitored by people loyal to Lucien in ways that transcended business. All she knew was that she was about to make sure Selina Reyes disappeared permanently, and that this time not even Lucien Moretti would be able to protect her. The pieces were all moving now, Adrian destroyed but vengeful, the Calabrese family wounded and dangerous, Viviana consumed by jealousy and planning murder, Selina trying to protect her children while trapped in a world she barely understood, and Lucien caught between the empire he'd built and the humanity he'd thought he'd buried years ago. Someone was going to die before this was over. The only question was who would break first and whether any of them would survive the answer. Dawn came to Chicago cold and unforgiving. In her secure apartment, Selina woke to find Emma sleeping curled against her, and Michael in the doorway watching them both with an expression she couldn't read. In his penthouse office, Lucien reviewed security footage showing Viviana making phone calls to people she shouldn't be talking to. In a police interrogation room, Adrian Voss slowly realized that every lawyer who'd ever protected him had suddenly become unavailable. And in a warehouse on the south side, where the Calabrese family conducted business they didn't want witnessed, plans were being made to finish what last night's failed attack had started. The war everyone had been avoiding was here now, and there was no path back to before. The custody hearing lasted exactly 47 minutes. Selina sat in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and broken promises, while Judge Patricia Hammond reviewed documents with the kind of careful attention that suggested she'd seen enough false testimony to recognize truth when it finally showed up. Adrian's lawyers tried stalling tactics that dissolved like sugar in water the moment Jennifer Watts presented encrypted financial records showing 12 years of systematic fraud. Emma and Michael waited in a conference room down the hall with a child psychologist who'd been hired to make sure they understood what was happening without being traumatized by legal proceedings that would reshape their entire lives. When the judge finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Mr. Voss, your actions constitute some of the most egregious abuse of legal process I've witnessed in 23 years on this bench. Custody is hereby restored to Miss Reyes effective immediately. You will have no contact with the minor children except through court-supervised visitation pending the outcome of criminal proceedings currently being initiated by federal prosecutors. She looked directly at Adrian. You destroyed your family through violence and manipulation. Consider yourself fortunate that this court's jurisdiction extends only to custody matters and not to the punishment you richly deserve. Adrian sat motionless at the defense table. His expensive suit couldn't hide the fact that he'd aged a decade in 3 days. When the bailiff approached to escort him out, he looked at Selina one last time with an expression that promised this wasn't over. She held his gaze without flinching because women who'd survived what she'd survived didn't break from stares anymore. Outside the courtroom, Emma threw herself into Selina's arms with enough force to nearly knock her over. Michael hung back for exactly 3 seconds before joining them, his careful guard finally cracking. They stood in the courthouse hallway, holding each other while lawyers and court staff walked around them, and Jennifer Watts watched with tears in her eyes because she'd been doing family law for 15 years, and victories this clean were rare enough to feel like miracles. We're going home, Selina whispered into Emma's hair. Where's home? Michael asked. His voice was quiet, but not defensive anymore, just genuinely uncertain. Good question. Home wasn't Adrian's mansion in Lincoln Park, wasn't the apartment Lucien had provided, wasn't any of the temporary shelters she'd survived in while building her case. Home was supposed to be where her children felt safe, and she could sleep without expecting violence through the door. She didn't know where that place was yet. I'll figure it out, she promised. But wherever it is, we'll be together. Her phone buzzed. Text from Lucien. Congratulations, security will bring you back to the apartment. We need to talk tonight about next steps. Situation with Calabrese is escalating. The reminder that the custody victory was just one battle in a larger war landed like cold water. Selena had her children back, but she'd acquired them through association with Chicago's most dangerous criminal. That protection had a price, even if Lucien hadn't named it yet. They returned to the secured apartment where guards moved like shadows, and everything felt temporary despite the expensive furniture. Emma immediately claimed the bedroom with the view of the lake. Michael unpacked slowly, methodically, like he didn't quite trust that this was permanent. Selena made them lunch from groceries someone had stocked while they were at court. Simple food that felt radical after months of supervised visits in sterile waiting rooms where she couldn't even hug her children without observers taking notes. Around 3 in the afternoon, while Emma napped and Michael was absorbed in a book, Selena's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Miss Reyes?" The voice was female, cultured, dripping with barely controlled rage. "We haven't been formally introduced. I'm Viviana De Luca." Selena's blood went cold. "How did you get this number? I know a great many things about you. Where you're staying, what school your children will attend, how many guards Lucien assigned to your door." Viviana's voice was silk over razors. "I know that you walked into his life less than a week ago and somehow convinced him to start a war that's costing us millions in lost revenue and destroyed alliances. I didn't convince him to do anything. I didn't ask for any of this. But you accepted it, didn't you? Let him play hero. Let him destroy Adrian Voss and attack the Calabrese family. Let him believe protecting you was worth tearing apart everything he built over 20 years. What do you want? I want you to understand something very clearly." Viviana's tone went arctic. "Lucien thinks he's protecting you, but what he's actually doing is painting a target on your back that every enemy he's ever made can now see. The Calabrese family wants you dead as a message to him. Adrian wants you dead for revenge. And I want you gone because you're a distraction he can't afford and a weakness that will eventually get him killed." "Then why are you warning me?" "I'm not warning you. I'm explaining why what's about to happen is your own fault." The line went dead. Selena stood frozen in the kitchen holding her phone while her hands started shaking. Through the window, Chicago looked peaceful in afternoon light. Inside her chest, something twisted with the understanding that Viviana hadn't called to threaten. She'd called to explain why threats were no longer necessary. She immediately called Lucien. Voicemail. She tried Rico. No answer. Marco didn't pick up either. The apartment suddenly felt less like protection and more like a very expensive cage. Emma wandered out of her bedroom, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mommy, who were you talking to?" "Nobody important, baby." The lie tasted like acid. "Why don't you go play in your room while I make dinner?" Emma studied her with the kind of intuition children developed when they'd lived through adult violence. "Are we safe here?" The question was too big and too complicated for a 7-year-old to be asking. "Yes," Selena lied again. "We're very safe." Emma didn't look convinced, but she went back to her room. Michael appeared in the doorway, his expression older than 9 years should allow. "Who was on the phone?" he asked quietly. "Michael, I heard you say a name, Viviana." He crossed his arms. "Dad used to talk about the De Luca family sometimes. He said they were dangerous, that even he didn't cross them. Smart kid. Too smart for his own good." "Everything's fine," Selena said with more confidence than she felt. "I promise you're safe here." Michael held her gaze for a long moment. "You're lying. You always bite your lip when you're lying. You've done it since I was little." The accuracy of the observation made her chest ache. Before she could respond, the apartment's security alarm chirped, someone entering through the main door. Selena's heart jumped into her throat. The guards were supposed to announce visitors. She moved to put herself between her children and whatever was coming through that door. Lucien entered looking like he'd aged 5 years since morning. His suit was rumpled. Blood stained his collar. Exhaustion carved lines around his eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. Rico followed him, moving stiffly like he was nursing injuries. "Pack everything," Lucien said without preamble. "You're moving to a different location, now." "What happened?" "The Calabrese family just tried to hit one of my distribution centers. We stopped them, but it was close. They're escalating faster than expected." He looked at her children standing in the doorway. His expression softened slightly. I need you somewhere more secure, somewhere they can't find easily. Viviana called me, Selena said. She knew where I was staying, knew about the guards. She said, Lucien's face went deadly. When? 20 minutes ago. Rico, get them to the car. Now. He pulled out his phone, already dialing, and find out how Viviana got past our communications blackout. They moved fast. Emma and Michael threw clothes into bags while Selena grabbed essentials with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The guards outside the door had multiplied. 6 men now, instead of 2. All armed, all looking like violence was imminent. They took the service elevator to the underground garage where 3 armored SUVs waited with engines running. Lucien put Selena and her children in the middle vehicle. Rico drove. 2 guards climbed in the back. The convoy pulled out into late afternoon traffic while Lucien made call after call in clipped Italian that sounded like orders for military deployment. Where are we going? Selena asked. A property outside the city. 40 acres with a single access road and enough security to hold off a small army. He glanced back at her. You'll be safe there until I finish cleaning up this mess. How long will that take? Depends on how stupid the Calabrese family wants to be. They drove in tense silence. Emma held Selena's hand tight enough to hurt. Michael stared out the window with an expression that was too blank, too carefully controlled. He was shutting down emotionally the way children did when the world became too dangerous to process. Selena wanted to comfort him but didn't know how to explain that the man sitting in front of them, the one who'd saved them, protected them, given them back their lives, was also a criminal whose protection came with a body count. They'd been driving for maybe 30 minutes when Rico's phone rang. He answered, listened, then his face went pale. Boss, we've got a problem. What kind of problem? The Calabrese family just hit your personal accounts. Froze everything. They've got someone inside the banking system feeding them access codes. Lucien's expression didn't change, but the air in the SUV suddenly felt dangerous. How much? All of it. Every liquid asset you had in the United States. The numbers had to be enormous. Tens of millions, probably. Maybe more. The kind of money that funded operations, paid soldiers, bought politicians. Without it, Lucien's empire would start collapsing within days. There's more, Rico said quietly. The feds just issued warrants for you. Rico charges. They're claiming they have a witness who can tie you directly to racketeering, money laundering, and 3 murders from 2019. Who's the witness? Rico hesitated. Viviana. The silence in the SUV was absolute. Even the children felt it, the sudden pressure drop that preceded disasters. Lucien's voice when he spoke was so cold it could have frozen blood. Pull over. Boss, pull. Over. Rico pulled the convoy to the side of a quiet suburban road lined with trees turning autumn colors. The other 2 SUVs flanked them protectively. Lucien climbed out and stood in the fading light making phone calls while Selena watched through tinted windows and tried to understand what she was witnessing. Betrayal. Complete and calculated. Viviana hadn't just warned the Calabrese family about Selena's location. She'd given federal prosecutors enough evidence to bring down Lucien's entire organization. She'd coordinated with enemies on multiple fronts to destroy him financially, legally, and operationally all at once. And she'd done it because Lucien had chosen to protect a broken woman over maintaining his alliance with her family. Rico turned in his seat to face Selena. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. This is your fault, he said quietly. Rico. One of the guards started. No, she needs to hear this. Rico's voice stayed level, but hard. A week ago, Lucien Moretti was untouchable. Now he's got federal warrants, empty bank accounts, and a war with the Calabrese family that's bleeding us dry. All because he couldn't walk past you bleeding on a sidewalk. I didn't ask for any of this, Selena said. Doesn't matter. You're the reason it's happening. You're the weakness everyone's exploiting. He gestured at Emma and Michael. And he's protecting you and your kids like you're worth more than the empire he built over 20 years of blood and violence. Rico, that's enough. The guard's hand moved to his weapon. Is it? Rico's eyes were cold. How many of our people died in that hotel attack? How many more are going to die before this is over? How much is one woman's life worth compared to all of that? The question hung in the air like poison. Emma started crying quietly. Michael pulled his sister closer, his face pale but determined. Outside, Lucien finished his calls and returned to the SUV. He looked at Rico, at Selena, at the tension filling the vehicle like smoke. What happened? Nothing, Rico said flatly. Just clarifying priorities. Lucien studied him for a long moment. We'll talk about your priorities later. Right now, we keep moving. They drove the rest of the way in brutal silence. The safe house turned out to be a compound hidden behind gates and walls that looked designed to survive artillery strikes. Inside, the main building was functional rather than luxurious. Reinforced doors, bulletproof windows, enough weapons storage to outfit a small militia. Guards patrolled the perimeter with military discipline. Lucien showed Selena and her children to a suite of rooms on the second floor. Emma immediately claimed the smaller bedroom. Michael stood in the doorway looking exhausted and scared and trying desperately to hide both. I need to go back to the city, Lucien said. Deal with the federal situation and the Calabrese problem. You'll be safe here with 12 armed guards and enough supplies to last 2 weeks if necessary. What about you? Selena asked. I'll survive. I always do. But he looked less certain than he sounded. Lucien, she caught his arm. Rico was right, wasn't he? This is my fault. You're losing everything because you decided to protect me. He looked at her with those gray eyes that had seen too much and somehow still found room for kindness. I made a choice. Choices have consequences. That's not on you. But if you hadn't been bleeding on that sidewalk, I'd still be the man who walked past people in trouble because getting involved was inconvenient. His voice was quiet. I spent 20 years building an empire on fear and violence and telling myself it was necessary. Maybe losing it is what I deserve for forgetting there were things more important than power. Your people are dying. Your money's frozen. The federal government is coming after you. Her voice broke. How is any of that worth protecting someone you barely know? Lucien was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something raw and undefended. Because when my mother died alone in that alley, nobody thought she was worth protecting either. And I swore I'd never let that happen to someone else if I had the power to stop it. He looked past her at Chicago's distant skyline visible through the window. Turns out having power means using it for something other than accumulating more power. Took me 20 years and almost getting destroyed to figure that out. He left before she could respond. The sound of the SUV engines faded into distance. Selena stood in the safe house that felt more like a prison and tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. Her children were safe. Adrian was destroyed. She had custody back. But the man who'd made it all possible was currently being dismantled by enemies who'd found every weakness he'd developed by caring about someone. Emma appeared in the doorway. Mommy, are we in trouble? No, baby. Then why does everyone look so scared? Because the world was full of people like Viviana who saw kindness as weakness. Because protection came with prices that kept getting higher. Because Selena had accepted help from a dangerous man, and now that man was paying for his humanity with everything he'd built. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated problems, Selena said carefully. But you don't need to worry about them. That's my job. Emma didn't look convinced, but she went to bed anyway. Michael stayed up later, sitting at the window watching guards patrol the compound perimeter. Are we going to have to run again? He asked quietly. I don't know. Dad used to say that running just meant the problem followed you, that the only way to stop running was to turn around and fight. Your dad said that? Before he got mean, Michael's voice was small. When I was really little, and he was still sometimes nice. Before whatever happened that made him angry all the time. The admission broke something in Selena's chest. She pulled Michael close, and they sat together watching darkness settle over the compound while armed men moved through shadows, and somewhere in Chicago, Lucien Moretti faced consequences he'd accepted as the price of remembering he was human. Around midnight, her phone rang. Lucien's voice sounded wrecked. Viviana's gone, disappeared right after filing her witness testimony. The feds have enough to arrest me, but they can't move until they verify her statement. I've got maybe 24 hours before they come. He took a breath. The Calabrese family sent a message through intermediaries. They want you. Said if I hand you over, they'll negotiate peace and convince Viviana to recant her testimony. Selena's blood turned to ice. What did you tell them? I told them to go to hell. His voice was absolutely certain. But I need you to understand what that means. It means they're going to keep coming. It means this war doesn't end until either they're destroyed or I am. It means your children are going to grow up surrounded by violence and guards and fear because I'm too stubborn to give you up. Then maybe you should. What? Give me to them. End this before more people die, before you lose everything. Her voice shook. I'm not worth what you're paying to protect me. The silence on the line stretched so long she thought he'd hung up. When he spoke, his voice carried old pain and older fury. My mother died believing nobody thought she was worth protecting, that her life had so little value that people literally stepped over her corpse for 3 days before someone called the police. His breath caught. I swore on her grave that I'd never let anyone feel that worthless again. So no, Selena, I'm not handing you over. Not to save money, not to save my empire, not to save my own life. Even if it destroys you, especially then, because the alternative is becoming someone who thinks power matters more than people. And I'd rather burn than be that man again. He hung up before she could argue. Selena sat in the dark safe house, holding her phone and thinking about the impossible calculus of value. Her life versus Lucien's empire. Her children's safety versus dozens of soldiers who'd die protecting them. Adrian's revenge versus the systematic destruction of Chicago's criminal underground. She'd started this wanting justice, wanting her children back, wanting to prove that women like her weren't invisible. She'd succeeded at all three. The price was higher than she'd ever imagined anyone would pay. Outside, guards changed shifts with military precision. Inside, her children slept believing their mother had saved them. And somewhere in Chicago, a man who'd built his life on violence was choosing to lose everything rather than sacrifice someone who reminded him that humanity was worth keeping. Selena thought about Rico's question. How much was one woman's life worth? She didn't know the answer, but she was starting to understand that the question itself was why people like Viviana won and people like Lucien lost. Because Viviana calculated value and power and money, while Lucien had made the fatal mistake of remembering that some things couldn't be measured that way. Her phone buzzed with another text. Unknown number again. Lucien thinks he can protect you. He's wrong. The Calabrese family is coming for you and everyone you love. They'll burn that compound to the ground with your children inside. The only question is whether you run now or die later. Choose fast. No signature. But Selena recognized the threat for what it was. Not a warning from an enemy, but from someone who knew exactly how this ended. She looked at her children sleeping in rooms that felt less safe with every passing minute. Looked at the guards outside who'd die when the attack came. Looked at her phone showing messages from a man who was losing everything because he'd decided she mattered. And Selena realized with horrible clarity that the only way to save any of them was to do something she'd spent her entire life avoiding. Stop running. Stop hiding behind protection she couldn't afford. Stop letting other people pay the price for her survival. She opened her laptop and started researching everything she could find about the Calabrese family, their operations, their territories, their weaknesses. Because if Lucien was going to war to protect her, the least she could do was figure out how to fight back. Outside, dawn was still hours away. Inside, Selena stopped being a victim and started becoming something far more dangerous. Someone who'd finally run out of places to hide and decided that meant it was time to stop hiding. The transformation wouldn't be pretty, wouldn't be clean, probably wouldn't even keep her alive. But her children deserved a mother who fought back, and Lucien deserved someone who understood that accepting protection meant being willing to become dangerous enough that protection wasn't always necessary. She picked up her phone and called the one person she knew would answer. Rico picked up on the second ring. I need to know everything, Selena said. Her voice was steady now, cold. Everything about the Calabrese family, everything about Viviana, everything about how to hurt people who think I'm weak enough to destroy. Why? Because I'm done letting other people die for me. Because my children need to learn that sometimes the only way to survive is to become someone your enemies never expected. She took a breath. And because Lucien's losing a war, he started to protect me. If I can't stop that, I can at least make sure I'm worth what he's paying. Rico was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, there was something like respect in his voice. I'll be there in an hour. Bring weapons, Selena said, and teach me how to use them. She hung up and stood at the window watching her children sleep and the guards patrol and the darkness that hid enemies who thought she was just collateral damage in a war between criminals. They were about to learn the difference between a victim and a survivor. And survivors, when you backed them into corners and threatened their children, stopped caring about staying safe. They cared about making sure the people hunting them regretted every choice that led to that moment. Outside, the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. Inside, Selena stopped being the woman Lucien had rescued from a sidewalk and started becoming the woman who'd make sure his sacrifice wasn't wasted on someone too broken to fight. Rico arrived at the compound 90 minutes before dawn, carrying a duffel bag that clinked with metal. He found Selena still standing at the window where she'd been when they spoke, her reflection ghostly in the bulletproof glass. The children slept behind closed doors. The guards had changed shifts again. Everything looked the same as it had 6 hours ago, except for the woman watching darkness fade into gray morning light. She'd stopped looking like someone who needed saving. "You sure about this?" Rico asked. He set the bag on the table with a heavy thud. "No." Selena turned to face him. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep but sharp with focus. "But I'm sure about what happens if I keep hiding while people die protecting me. So teach me what I need to know." Rico studied her for a long moment. Whatever he saw made him nod slowly. He unzipped the bag and pulled out a Glock 9mm. "This is the simplest weapon to learn. Point and shoot. 15-round magazine. Enough stopping power to drop someone if you hit center mass. I've never touched a gun. You're about to learn fast." He showed her how to check if it was loaded, how to release the magazine, how to chamber a round. His hands moved with practiced efficiency while he explained mechanics in a tone that suggested he'd taught this lesson too many times. "The recoil's going to surprise you. Don't fight it. Let the weapon settle and reacquire your target. Always double tap. 2 shots minimum. 1 to stop them, 2nd to make sure they stay stopped." Selena's hands shook when she first held the gun. The weight was wrong. The metal was cold. Everything about it felt alien and dangerous and completely necessary. They went to the compound's shooting range, a reinforced bunker built into the hillside behind the main house. Rico set up targets at 7 yards. "This is close quarters distance. If they're breaching the house, this is how far away they'll be when you need to shoot." He demonstrated. Smooth draw, steady aim, controlled breathing, squeeze the trigger instead of pulling it. The shots echoed off concrete walls, both targets center mass. "Your turn!" Selena's first shot went wide by 2 feet. The recoil jerked her arms up. The sound was louder than she expected, even through ear protection. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Again," Rico said. She fired until the magazine was empty. Maybe 3 shots actually hit the target. None of them would have stopped anyone. "Terrible," Rico said flatly. "But you've got all day to get less terrible. Reload." They trained for 4 hours. By the time the sun was fully up, Selena's hands had stopped shaking and half her shots were landing somewhere near center mass. Her shoulders ached. Her ears rang despite the protection. Gunpowder residue coated her hands. She'd thrown up once from pure adrenaline overload. Rico watched her empty another magazine into a target. "Better. You won't win any competitions, but if someone breaks through that door, you might survive long enough for help to arrive." "What else do I need to know?" "About shooting? Nothing you can learn in a day that'll make a real difference." He reloaded his own weapon with movements so automatic they looked like breathing. "About surviving? Everything. The Calabrese family doesn't just kill people, they make examples. If they take you alive, they'll hurt you in ways that make dying look like mercy. Then they'll film it and send it to Lucien as a message. Then I won't let them take me alive." Rico's expression shifted slightly. Not quite approval, but something close. "There's a bunker under the west wing. Steel door, biometric lock. If they breach the compound, you take your kids there, and you don't come out until Lucien or I personally open that door. Understand?" "What about you and the other guards?" "We'll be doing our jobs, which is buying you time to get underground." He pulled out a knife, compact, wickedly sharp. "Keep this on you. If somehow they get past us and trap you before you make it to the bunker, you use this however you need to. Eyes, throat, anywhere soft. You're not trying to fight fair. You're trying to survive." Selena took the knife. It felt even more wrong than the gun. More personal, more real. "Lucien know you're teaching me this?" she asked. Lucien's been a little busy trying to keep federal agents from kicking in his door, while simultaneously preparing for war with a crime family that wants him dead. Rico's voice was dry. But yeah, I texted him. He said if this is what you need to feel less helpless, I should help. He also said to tell you you're an idiot for thinking you need to learn to kill people when he's got 12 professionals here who kill people for a living. What do you think? Rico was quiet for a moment. I think you spent 12 years married to a man who hurt you, and you survived by learning to disappear. Now you're trying to learn the opposite, how to be dangerous instead of invisible. He met her eyes. I think that's probably the sanest reaction anyone could have to the situation you're in. And I think if more people had your instinct to fight back instead of staying helpless, predators like Adrian wouldn't exist. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd heard from him. Coming from a man who'd called her a liability less than 24 hours ago, it felt like earned respect. They went back inside as morning turned toward afternoon. Emma and Michael were awake, eating breakfast one of the guards had prepared. Emma ran to Selena immediately. Where were you? Learning something I should have learned a long time ago. Selena hugged her daughter tight, very aware of the gun now tucked into her waistband and the knife strapped to her ankle. How did you sleep? Okay, this place is weird. There's cameras everywhere. The cameras keep us safe. Michael appeared in the doorway. He looked at Selena, at Rico standing behind her, at something in their posture that suggested violence had just been discussed in clinical detail. You learned to shoot, Michael said. Not a question. Yes. Is someone coming to hurt us? The directness of it caught her off guard. She could lie. Tell him everything was fine, that the guns and guards were just precautions. But Michael had spent his whole life watching adults lie about danger. He deserved better. Maybe, Selena said carefully, some very bad people are angry at Mr. Moretti for protecting us. They might try to hurt him by hurting us. But there are a lot of guards here who won't let that happen. And if somehow they do get past all those guards, I'm going to make sure you and Emma stay safe. By shooting them? If I have to. Emma started crying. Michael pulled his sister close, his expression going carefully blank the way it did when emotions got too big to process. I don't want anyone to die, Emma whispered. Neither do I, baby. Selena's voice cracked. But sometimes we don't get to choose between good options and bad options. Sometimes we only get to choose between bad options and worse options. And I'm choosing the option where you and Michael survive, even if that means doing things that scare me. It was too honest, too raw. The kind of truth that would probably require therapy bills later. But she was done lying to her children about how dangerous the world actually was. Rico's phone buzzed. He read the message and his expression went dark. Boss is 20 minutes out, says we need to fortify positions because intel suggests the Calabrese family is moving tonight instead of waiting for federal indictments. Why tonight? Because they know Lucian's resources are stretched. Because they think hitting us now before he can properly prepare gives them the advantage. Rico was already moving, making calls, issuing orders. Everyone to defensive positions. Lock down all entry points. I want overlapping fields of fire on every approach vector. The compound transformed. Guards moved with urgent purpose. Weapons appeared from hidden storage. What had looked like a secure house became a fortress preparing for siege. Selena herded her children toward the bunker Rico had shown her, trying to memorize the path in case they had to run it in darkness. The biometric lock recognized her thumbprint on the second try. The steel door swung open to reveal a space maybe 20 feet square. Shelves held water, food, medical supplies, ammunition, a radio for communication, thick blankets, everything necessary to survive underground for days if needed. This is our safe place, Selena explained to Emma and Michael. If I say run, this is where we come. We lock the door and we wait until someone we trust opens it, okay? Emma nodded, still crying quietly. Michael just stared at the bunker with an expression that said he was filing away every detail in case he needed to navigate here alone. They returned upstairs as Lucian's SUV pulled through the compound gates. He climbed out looking like he'd been awake for 48 hours straight. His suit was wrinkled. Stubble shadowed his jaw. Blood stained his cuff. Not his own, based on how he moved. He saw Selena standing on the porch and something in his expression shifted. Relief, maybe. Or just exhaustion catching up with him. You're still here, he said. Where else would I be? Running. Most people would be running. He climbed the steps slowly. Up close, she could see the toll the past week had taken, dark circles under his eyes, lines around his mouth. The weight of an empire collapsing pressed into his shoulders. Rico said you wanted to learn to shoot. I needed to do something other than hide and hope you fixed everything. Did it help? I'm still terrified, but at least now the terror has direction. Lucien almost smiled. That's about all any of us can ask for. They went inside to the main security room where monitors showed every angle of the compound. Rico and Marco were already there, reviewing defensive positions with 3 other men Selena recognized as senior members of Lucien's organization. Intel says minimum 20 Calabrese soldiers moving tonight, Marco reported. Maybe more. They're not even hiding it anymore, just marshaling forces and preparing for a direct assault. What about the feds? Lucien asked. Still tied up verifying Viviana's testimony. She disappeared after filing, but she left enough evidence that they have to investigate before issuing warrants. We've got maybe 12 hours before they move. Maybe less. So we're fighting a war on 2 fronts with frozen assets and limited ammunition. Lucien looked at the monitors showing his guards taking positions. How many people can we field? Here? 17, including us. Another 30 scattered across Chicago, but we can't pull them without leaving our other operations completely exposed. 17 against 20 plus. Lucien's voice was flat. Poor odds. We've survived worse. Have we? Lucien glanced at Selena. Get her and the children to the bunker. Nobody opens that door except me or Rico. If we're both dead, she waits 48 hours, then calls this number. He handed Selena a card with a phone number written in neat script. Federal Witness Protection. They'll cut a deal in exchange for testimony about the Calabrese family. I'm not testifying against anyone. You will if it keeps your children alive. His voice went hard. I'm not letting you die noble, Selena. If this goes wrong, you survive and you raise Emma and Michael somewhere safe, even if that means cooperating with federal agents who want to destroy everything I built. Before she could argue, alarms started screaming through the compound. Every monitor flickered to different angles showing the same nightmare. Vehicles approaching fast on the single-access road. At least 6 trucks, maybe 7. Headlights cutting through evening darkness like search beams. They're early, Rico said flatly. They're not even waiting for full dark, because they know we're ready and they're hoping speed compensates for surprise. Lucien was already moving. Everyone to positions. Selena, get your kids underground right now. She ran. Emma and Michael sensed the urgency and followed without questions. They made it to the bunker in under a minute. Selena locked them inside while gunfire erupted somewhere above ground. The distinctive crack of rifles, the deeper boom of shotguns, the sustained rattle of automatic weapons. Stay here, she told her children. No matter what you hear, no matter how long it takes, you stay here until someone opens this door. What about you? Michael demanded. I'm going to make sure nobody gets past the guards. Mommy, no. Emma grabbed her hand. I love you both so much. Selena kissed her daughter's forehead, then her son's. Be brave. Take care of each other. And remember that everything I'm doing is to keep you safe. She locked them inside before her courage failed. The sound of their crying followed her up the stairs, along with renewed gunfire that sounded closer now, louder, more desperate. The main floor was chaos. Guards fired from windows while others dragged wounded men away from exposed positions. Selena smelled cordite and blood and fear. Someone was screaming, high and panicked, and suddenly cut off. Rico appeared next to her, holding a rifle. What the hell are you doing up here? I'm not hiding while people die for me. That's exactly what you're supposed to be doing. I learned to shoot this morning. Put me somewhere I can be useful. Rico stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. But fear had transformed into something else during the run to the bunker. Something cold and focused and completely done with being helpless. East windows, Rico finally said. 3rd guard position. You see anyone who isn't ours, you shoot them. Don't think. Don't hesitate. Just shoot. He shoved her toward a window where a guard was already firing controlled bursts at attackers advancing through the compound's outer perimeter. The guard glanced at her, recognized her, did a double take. Boss, know you're here. Does it matter? Probably not. He fired 3 more shots. They're using the tree line for cover, advancing in groups of 3. Every time we take one down, 2 more appear. Selena positioned herself at the window's edge and tried to remember everything Rico had taught her. Controlled breathing, steady hands, center mass. The gun felt heavy and foreign, but she raised it anyway, sighting down at shadows moving between trees. A figure broke from cover running toward the house. She tracked him, squeezed the trigger twice the way Rico had taught. Both shots missed, but the man dove for cover and stayed there. "Close enough," the guard muttered. "You're keeping them honest." They fought for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Selena fired until her magazine was empty, reloaded with shaking hands, fired again. She hit someone once, saw him stumble and fall. The sight made her stomach twist, but she kept shooting because stopping meant dying, and her children were locked in a bunker counting on their mother to keep breathing. Somewhere behind them, an explosion rocked the compound. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. Smoke poured through the hallway. They breached the south entrance. Rico's voice crackled over the radio. "Multiple hostiles inside. Fall back to interior positions." The guard next to Selena grabbed her arm. "Come on, we're pulling back." They retreated through smoke and chaos to a reinforced room that served as the compound's final defensive position. Maybe 10 guards were already there. 5 more staggered in behind them. Someone was bleeding heavily from a head wound. Another man clutched an arm that bent wrong. Lucien appeared through the smoke looking like something from a nightmare. Blood covered his face and hands. His shirt was torn. He carried a weapon in each hand and moved with the precise violence of someone who'd accepted that survival meant becoming a monster. "How many did we lose?" he demanded. 4 confirmed dead, 6 wounded bad enough their combat ineffective. Marco's voice was strained. He'd been shot somewhere. Blood soaked through his jacket. "They've got the south wing, and they're pushing toward the bunker." Selena's heart stopped. "My children!" "The bunker's secure. They'd need military explosives to breach that door." Lucien turned to her. His expression when he saw her holding a weapon was complex, anger and respect, and something that might have been pride. "What are you doing here?" "Same thing as you, not dying quietly." "Selena, don't." She cut him off. "Don't tell me to hide. Don't tell me to run. I'm done watching other people bleed for me while I stay safe. If they want my children, they go through me first." Something shifted in Lucien's face, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Not the victim he'd rescued, not the woman he'd protected. Someone different, someone dangerous. "Then stay behind me and shoot anything that comes through that door that isn't us," he said quietly. The attackers hit the interior position hard. They'd abandoned stealth completely in favor of overwhelming force. Selena fired into the doorway until her ears rang and her hands burned and the bodies started piling up in ways that would haunt her for the rest of her life, however long that was. Someone threw a flashbang. The world exploded into white light and deafening pressure. Selena couldn't see, couldn't hear, could only fire blindly in the direction enemies had been coming from and hope she hit something that mattered. When her vision cleared, 3 attackers were down in the doorway. 2 of Lucien's guards were dead. The man who'd been shot in the head earlier was no longer moving. They were losing, dying by inches. Running out of ammunition and time and the kind of miracles that kept 17 people alive against 30. Rico's voice came through the radio harsh with static. "Boss, I've got eyes on the Calabrese family's command vehicle. They're hanging back 1/4 mile down the access road. Take out their leadership and the ground forces might retreat." "How many protecting the vehicle?" 4 I can see. Maybe more. "Can you get a shot?" "Not from here. Would need to get within 200 yards. That's through active combat zone with hostiles on both sides." Lucien looked at the remaining guards, looked at Selena, made calculations that probably involved acceptable casualties and strategic necessity and all the cold mathematics of violence. "I'm going," he said. "Boss, you can't, If their leadership stays alive, they'll keep throwing bodies at us until we're buried under corpses. We end this by cutting off the head." He checked his weapons, reloaded both. "Marco, you hold this position. Nobody gets to that bunker. You understand me? Nobody." Marco nodded, pale but steady. Lucien turned to Selena. His gray eyes carried too much history, too much exhaustion, too much acceptance of what was about to happen. "If I don't come back, don't. Selena, don't say goodbye. Don't give me instructions for after you're dead. Just go kill the people trying to murder my children and come back alive." Her voice broke. Please, come back alive." He touched her face briefly. His hand was warm despite the blood. Then he was gone, disappearing into smoke and chaos with Rico and two other guards who looked like they'd already accepted death as likely. The firing intensified somewhere outside. Selena couldn't tell who was winning anymore, could only reload and shoot and try not to think about the fact that the man who'd saved her life was currently running toward his probable death because staying in defensive positions meant slow, inevitable defeat. Marco was bleeding worse now. The arm wound had progressed to something critical. His face was gray. "You need a medic," Selena said. "Medics are for people who survive." His voice was surprisingly calm. "I'm good for maybe another 20 minutes. After that, you're on your own defending that bunker door." "I can't. You learned to shoot this morning, and you've lasted 4 hours in combat against professional killers. You can do whatever you have to do to keep breathing." He fired 3 more shots through the doorway. "Your kids are counting on their mother. Don't disappoint them." The simple truth of it steadied her. Emma and Michael were locked underground listening to their mother fight. They needed her alive. That need was bigger than fear, bigger than exhaustion, bigger than the voices in her head screaming that she was going to die in this smoke-filled compound before morning. An explosion outside shook the foundation. Someone screamed. The radio crackled with voices shouting in Italian too fast for Selena to follow. Then silence. Horrible, complete silence. No gunfire, no shouting, just the sound of wind through broken windows and small fires crackling somewhere deeper in the compound. Marco raised his weapon toward the doorway. "Here they come." But the figure that appeared through the smoke was Lucien. He looked like he'd crawled through hell. Blood covered him head to foot. His left arm hung useless. One eye was swollen nearly shut. He moved like every step cost him, but he was moving and he was alive. "They're pulling back," he said hoarsely. "Leadership's dead. Ground forces lost stomach for it when they realized nobody was giving orders anymore." "How many did we lose?" "Enough." His voice was flat. "Too many." He sagged against the wall. Selena rushed to support him and nearly buckled under his weight. Marco tried to help and collapsed instead, his wound finally catching up to him. Around them, the compound was destroyed. Windows shattered, walls pocked with bullet holes, blood everywhere. Bodies in the doorways, the kind of carnage that would require industrial cleaning and probably therapy for anyone who'd witnessed it. But her children were safe underground. Lucien was alive. She was still breathing. In the calculus of survival, that counted as victory. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police probably. Maybe federal agents finally getting around to the warrants. Maybe just Chicago emergency services responding to reports of what sounded like military engagement in the suburbs. "We need to leave," Lucien said. "Now. Before the feds arrive and arrest everyone still standing." "What about the wounded?" "We take who we can carry. The rest surrender and claim they were defending property from home invasion. My lawyers will have them out in 48 hours. He looked at her with his one functioning eye. "Get your children. We're going to ground until I can figure out what's left of my organization and whether federal charges are still coming." Selena ran to the bunker. Her hand shook so hard she could barely work the biometric lock. When the door finally opened, Emma and Michael threw themselves at her with enough force to knock her down. They were crying. She was crying. Everyone was alive against odds that should have killed them. "Is it over?" Emma asked. "For now," Selena said, because lying seemed cruel after everything they'd survived. They emerged from this bunker to find Rico and 3 other guards loading wounded into an SUV. The compound looked like a war zone because it had been a war zone. 17 defenders against 30-plus attackers. The math shouldn't have worked, but somehow they'd survived through violence and desperation and refusing to quit even when dying looked inevitable. Lucien sat in the SUV's passenger seat, eyes closed, breathing shallow. A medic, one of the guards with military training, was trying to stop the bleeding from his arm. The wound looked bad, bone deep, the kind that required surgery and prayers. "Hospital?" the medic asked. "No hospitals. Feds will have them watched." Lucien opened his good eye. "Safe house in Gary, Indiana. We've got a doctor there who doesn't ask questions." They drove through darkness with police lights converging behind them. Selena sat in the back holding her children while Rico navigated back roads that avoided checkpoints. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say that could encompass what had just happened. They'd survived. But the cost kept rising. And somewhere in Chicago, Viviana DeLuca was probably smiling because even though her assassination attempt had failed, she'd succeeded in destroying Lucian's empire and proving that caring about people made you vulnerable in ways that eventually got you killed. The safe house in Gary turned out to be a decrepit apartment above a closed factory. The doctor was older than time and asked 0 questions while stitching Lucian's arm and treating the other wounded. Emma and Michael fell asleep on a couch that smelled like mold. Selena stood at a dirty window watching dawn break over industrial wasteland and thought about the trajectory that had brought her from bleeding on a Chicago sidewalk to killing people in defense of children whose fathers she'd left behind in custody of a legal system that suddenly felt irrelevant compared to the violence of the real world. Lucian found her there as morning light turned everything gray. "Your kids okay?" he asked. "Physically, emotionally is going to take years of therapy." She looked at him. "Your arm? Will heal, eventually." He leaned against the wall with visible effort. "The feds are coming." Viviana's testimony combined with the Calabrese family's attack gives them everything they need for RICO charges. Even if I survive the legal battle, the empire's finished. The families won't follow someone who's radioactive with federal attention. So what happens now? Now I figure out how to disappear before I'm arrested, how to move what little money I can still access into accounts the government can't touch. How to survive long enough to rebuild from nothing. His voice was exhausted. And how to keep you and your children alive while doing all of that. "Lucien," she touched his uninjured arm, "you don't have to keep protecting us. You've done more than anyone had a right to expect. If you need to run, just run. We'll figure something out. After everything, you really think I'd abandon you now? I think you've sacrificed enough. Your empire, your money, your safety. How much more are you supposed to lose for someone you met less than 2 weeks ago?" He looked at her with those gray eyes that had seen too much, and somehow still found room for something other than cruelty. "I told you my mother died believing nobody thought she was worth protecting," he said quietly. "I spent 20 years building power so I'd never feel that helpless again. Then I met you bleeding on a sidewalk and realized the power I'd built didn't matter if I used it the same way everyone else did, to protect myself while ignoring everyone weaker. That's not an answer. The answer is that losing an empire built on violence might be the best thing that ever happened to me, because it means I have to figure out who I am when I'm not the most dangerous man in Chicago." He smiled slightly. "Maybe I'll discover I'm someone worth being, or maybe I'll discover I'm nothing without the fear. Either way, I'd rather find out with you still alive than spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have been different." Before Selena could respond, Rico burst through the door looking panicked. "We've got a problem. Federal agents just raided every property associated with you. They're freezing accounts, seizing assets, arresting anyone with your last name." He paused. "And they found Viviana." "Where?" "Bottom of Lake Michigan. Bullet through the back of her head. Professional execution." Rico's expression was grim. "The Calabrese family killed her after she failed to take you out. They're cleaning house, eliminating anyone who can testify about their involvement." Lucian absorbed this with no visible reaction, which means the feds just lost their star witness and most of their case. Also means the Calabrese family is desperate. Killing Viviana was a message. They're willing to murder anyone to prevent exposure. Or, Selena's voice cut through the room, "it means someone else killed her." Both men turned to stare at her. Someone who knew where she was hiding, someone with access to professional killers, someone who benefits from both the feds losing their witness and the Calabrese family looking guilty. She looked at Lucian. Someone who needed this war to end before it destroyed everything completely. Understanding dawned slowly across Lucian's face. "You think I think someone in your organization made a decision, maybe with your knowledge, maybe without. But either way, Viviana's dead, and the timing is awfully convenient." She kept her voice level. "I'm not judging. I don't even know if I care anymore. I just need to know if the man I'm trusting with my children's lives is capable of ordering murders to protect us." The question sat between them like a live grenade. Lucian held her gaze steadily. "Yes, I'm capable of that. I've done it before. I'll probably do it again, but I didn't kill Viviana. The Calabrese family did because she became a liability the moment her attack failed. You're sure? I'm sure. Something in his voice carried absolute certainty. If I wanted her dead, she would have died days ago before she could testify. I kept her alive, hoping she'd realize betraying me was a mistake. That was my error, thinking people could still be reached after they'd decided you were the enemy. Selina studied him, looking for tells, for cracks in the story, for reasons not to believe him. Found none. Okay, she said simply. That's it? Just okay? You've bled for my children. You've destroyed your empire protecting us. You've given me more reasons to trust you than anyone in my entire life. She moved closer. So yes. Okay, I believe you. Something in Lucian's expression cracked. Relief, maybe, or just exhaustion finally catching up. He pulled her into a one-armed embrace that was probably inappropriate given everything, but felt like the only honest thing in a world built on lies. Rico cleared his throat. Touching moment, but we still need to move. Feds might not have a case anymore, but they're going to try anyway. And the Calabrese family knows we survived their attack, which means they'll try again. Where can we go that's actually safe? Selina asked. Nowhere in Chicago, maybe nowhere in the United States. Lucian's voice was steady, despite the impossible situation. We'll need new identities, cash that can't be traced, transport outside federal jurisdiction. How long will that take to arrange? 72 hours if we're lucky, week if we're not. And until then? Lucian looked at her children sleeping on the couch, at the ruins of everything he'd built scattered across police evidence rooms and federal seizure documents. Until then, he said quietly, we do what people like us have always done when the world tries to destroy them. What's that? We survive. We adapt. And we make sure the people hunting us regret every choice that led to this moment. Outside, Gary, Indiana woke up to another gray morning. Inside the safe house, survivors of Chicago's bloodiest criminal war in decades tried to figure out how to become people who didn't exist anymore. And somewhere in the ruins of the compound, federal agents were discovering evidence of violence that would require years to fully process and prosecute, assuming they could find anyone left alive to charge. The war was over. The casualties were counted. The empire was destroyed. But Lucien Moretti and Selina Reyes were still breathing, still together, still dangerous enough that the question wasn't whether they'd survive. The question was what they'd become in order to make sure survival was... The 72 hours Lucien promised turned into 6 days of living like ghosts in a series of increasingly decrepit safe houses scattered across the industrial wasteland between Gary and Detroit. They moved every night after dark. Selina, her children, Lucien, Rico, and 3 guards who'd survived the compound assault and refused to abandon their boss even when loyalty stopped making financial sense. Emma and Michael adapted with the strange resilience children developed when normal stopped existing. They learned to sleep in cars, learned to pack a bag in under 2 minutes, learned that asking questions about where they were going just made the adults look more exhausted. Selina watched her children transform and hated it. Hated that survival required teaching them skills no 9-year-old and 7-year-old should need. But the alternative was lying to them about danger they could feel in every tense conversation and sudden departure. So she chose hard truth over comfortable fiction and hoped future therapists would understand. Lucien spent those 6 days on encrypted phones coordinating what remained of his shattered empire. Most of his lieutenants had scattered when federal raids began. Some were arrested. A few turned informant in exchange for reduced sentences. The ones still loyal reported that the Calabrese family had withdrawn from Chicago entirely after losing 30 soldiers and their leadership in a single disastrous night. Other crime families were circling the territory Lucien had abandoned, carving up his former holdings like wolves over a carcass. 20 years of building power, gone in less than 2 weeks. He took the destruction with eerie calm, like he'd expected it, maybe even welcomed it. On the 7th night, they arrived at a warehouse in Detroit's abandoned industrial district, where a man named Victor waited with documents, cash, and transportation. Victor was maybe 50, built like he'd spent decades doing physical labor, with the kind of face that suggested he'd seen worse things than whatever you were about to tell him. He spoke with a Russian accent thick enough to cut. Passports are Canadian, Victor explained, spreading documents across a metal table that had probably witnessed crimes Selina didn't want to imagine. Birth certificates, social security numbers, complete background histories in case anyone checks. You are the Castellano family, Anthony, Maria, and your 2 children, from Vancouver. Moving to Central America for Anthony's consulting work. Lucien, now Anthony Castellano, according to the passport, examined the documents with professional attention. These will hold up to federal scrutiny? They will hold up to anything short of Interpol forensic investigation. And even then, maybe. Victor smiled without warmth. I have been making people disappear for 23 years. Only 2 have ever been found, both because they were stupid enough to contact family after I told them not to. He handed Selena her new passport, Maria Castellano. The photo was recent, taken when exactly she couldn't remember, which meant someone in Lucian's organization had been photographing her without permission. The violation should have bothered her more than it did. Instead, she just felt grateful someone had been planning escape routes while she was learning to shoot. Emma became Sophie Castellano. Michael became Marcus. Their birth dates shifted by several months, their entire histories rewritten into Canadian fiction. The children will need coaching, Victor said. If anyone asks where they went to school, what neighborhood they lived in, they must have answers that match the documents. Inconsistency gets you caught. How long do we have to learn this? Michael asked. His voice was steady despite being 9 years old and listening to adults discuss erasing his identity. Victor looked at him with something like respect. Smart boy. Most children do not understand what is happening. You understand, yes? I understand we're running from people who want to kill us. I understand we can't be who we used to be anymore. Michael's jaw tightened. I don't understand why we can't just tell the police. Because police work for a system that believes in rules and evidence and presumption of innocence, Lucien said quietly. The people hunting us don't. They believe in sending messages written in blood. Would you rather trust a system that moves slowly and might protect you or disappear completely where nobody can find you? Michael thought about it with the seriousness of someone much older. Disappear. Then you learn your new name, your new birthday, your new history, and you never mention your old name again. Not to friends, not to teachers, not even to yourself in your head. Lucian's voice was gentle but absolute. Because the boy named Michael Reyes died with his father's arrest. The boy who survives is Marcus Castellano. Different person, different life. Understand? Michael nodded slowly. Emma started crying again. She'd been crying on and off for days. Not loud, just quiet tears that leaked down her face while she tried to be brave. Selena pulled her daughter close and felt her own heart breaking for the 100th time that week. How much? Lucien asked Victor. For documents, $200,000. For transportation to Costa Rica, another $50,000. For the house I have arranged outside San Jose, $100,000 per year, including security and maintenance. Victor's expression didn't change. Total investment for complete disappearance, $350,000. Plus living expenses, which will be considerable if you wish to maintain reasonable security. Lucien pulled out a phone and made a transfer that probably involved cryptocurrency, or offshore accounts, or the kind of financial instruments that existed specifically to move money invisibly. Victor checked his own device and nodded. Transportation leaves tomorrow night from a private airstrip outside Toledo. Be there at midnight. Bring nothing that connects you to your old lives. No photos, no documents, no jewelry that can be traced. He looked at Selena. That includes wedding rings. She still wore her ring from Adrian, had never taken it off despite the divorce and the abuse and the systematic destruction of their marriage. Partly because selling it required energy she didn't have. Partly because removing it felt like admitting she'd wasted 12 years on someone who'd never loved her the way marriage vows promised. She twisted it off her finger now. The skin underneath was pale. The ring left an indentation that would fade given time. Victor held out his hand. She gave him the ring. He examined it briefly, then dropped it into a metal bin that probably contained other people's abandoned lives. Good, he said simply. Now you are ready to disappear. They spent their last night in the United States in a motel outside Toledo that charged by the hour and didn't ask questions. Emma and Michael shared one bed. Selena lay in the other bed next to Lucien, both of them fully clothed, neither sleeping despite exhaustion that should have rendered consciousness impossible. You don't have to come with us, Selena said into the darkness. Victor could arrange separate documentation. You could disappear somewhere they'd never think to look for you. Is that what you want? I want you to stop sacrificing everything for people you barely know. Lucienne was quiet for a long time. Outside, traffic moved past on the highway. Inside, her children breathed with the deep rhythm of actual sleep. When my mother died, I swore I'd build enough power that I'd never feel helpless again, he finally said. Spent 2 decades doing exactly that. Became the most feared man in Chicago. Built an empire that generated millions in revenue and employed hundreds of people in controlled territory that stretched across 3 states. His voice was soft. And when federal agents started freezing my accounts and seizing my properties, I realized something. All that power, every dollar, every soldier, every politician I owned, none of it actually mattered. Because the only thing worth having is being the kind of person who stops when they see someone bleeding instead of walking past because getting involved is inconvenient. That's a nice philosophy. Doesn't explain why you're following us to Costa Rica. Maybe I'm not following you. Maybe I'm just finally going somewhere other than deeper into the same violence that killed my father and destroyed my mother. He turned to face her in the darkness. Or maybe I care about you and your children, and I'm tired of pretending that caring about people makes you weak, when really it's the only thing that makes you human. The honesty in his voice made Selina's chest ache. She reached across the small space between them and found his hand. He laced his fingers through hers. They lay there in a motel room that smelled like disinfectant and desperation, holding hands like teenagers, while their old lives dissolved into federal evidence rooms and witness testimony. I killed someone, Selina whispered. During the compound attack, maybe more than one. I don't remember exactly how many times I pulled the trigger. I know. Does it get easier, living with that? No. His grip tightened slightly. You just get better at carrying it, at putting it somewhere in your head where it doesn't destroy you completely, but it never stops being there. I don't want Emma and Michael growing up thinking violence is how you solve problems. Then we teach them something better. We show them that violence is what you use when everything else fails and survival requires becoming someone you're not proud of. And then we teach them how to build lives where violence isn't necessary. He was quiet. We teach them that sometimes breaking becomes inevitable, but healing afterwards is a choice. Dawn came gray and cold. They loaded into an SUV Rico had stolen from somewhere. Plates already switched, VIN filed off, completely untraceable. They drove through Ohio's flat farmland toward Toledo while Emma asked questions about Costa Rica that Selina couldn't answer because she'd never been there and didn't know what their life would look like beyond the abstract concept of safe. The airstrip was exactly what Selina expected. A single runway cut through trees, a hangar that looked abandoned, no tower or control system visible anywhere. A small jet sat waiting, expensive but unmarked. The pilot was a woman, maybe 35, who introduced herself as Sarah and asked 0 questions about who they were or why they needed to leave the country in the middle of the night. Flight time to San Jose is approximately 6 hours, Sarah explained while performing pre-flight checks. We'll refuel in Mexico. Costa Rican customs are handled. You'll clear immigration without issue. Rico and the 3 remaining guards stayed behind. They'd scatter across the country, find work with other organizations, eventually fade into the criminal underground where loyalty was currency and asking about former employers was considered rude. Rico shook Lucien's hand before they boarded. It's been an honor, boss. You kept us alive when the odds said we should all be dead. The honor was mine. Lucien's voice was rough. Take care of yourself. Don't get caught doing anything stupid. Same to you. Rico looked at Selina. You're tougher than I gave you credit for. Most people would have broken under what you survived. Most people would have been smarter than getting involved with Chicago's criminal underground in the first place, Selina replied. Rico almost smiled. Probably. But then you'd still be married to Adrian Voss, wondering when he was going to kill you. Sometimes the devil you choose is better than the one you're running from. They boarded the jet as midnight approached. The interior was luxury, attempting to disguise itself as utilitarian, leather seats but worn. Good lighting, but harsh. Everything functional rather than impressive. Emma and Michael claimed seats near windows. Selina sat across from Lucien. Sarah went through safety procedures in a tone that suggested she'd flown people fleeing federal warrants often enough to have the speech memorized. The engine spooled up. The jet rolled down the runway, gathering speed. Then the wheels left asphalt, and they were airborne, climbing fast through darkness towards something that might be freedom, or might just be different prison in a warmer climate. Emma pressed her face against the window, watching lights fall away below. "Are we ever coming back?" "Probably not, baby," Selena said. "What about Grandma and my friends from school? We'll write them letters someday. When it's safe. Tell them we moved for work, and we're happy." The lies came easier now. Practice, maybe. Or just acceptance that truth was a luxury they couldn't afford anymore. "I don't want to be Sophie," Emma whispered. "I want to be Emma." "I know." Selena pulled her daughter close. "But Emma has to go away for a while so Sophie can keep you safe. Maybe someday when you're older, Emma can come back. But right now, Sophie is who we need." It was a terrible answer, the kind that would definitely require therapy. But Emma seemed to accept it with the resignation of children who'd learned that adult decisions weren't negotiable. The flight passed in exhausted silence. They refueled in Mexico City, where armed men watched from the tarmac but didn't approach. Sarah handled whatever needed handling with cash and paperwork. 90 minutes later, they were airborne again, heading south toward Central America. Selena must have slept because she woke to daylight flooding through windows and the sensation of descent. Below, Costa Rica looked impossibly green. Mountains covered in rainforest, coastal plains dotted with development, clouds sitting in valleys like spilled cotton. They landed at Juan Santa Maria International Airport outside San Jose. Customs officers examined their Canadian passports with professional boredom, asked about the purpose of their visit, accepted Anthony Castellano's explanation that he was relocating for consulting work, stamped documents, welcomed them to Costa Rica. Just like that, they were through, legal, documented, completely reinvented. A car waited outside, driven by a local man who worked for whatever organization Victor represented. They drove through San Jose's outskirts into mountainous terrain where expensive homes hid behind walls and gates. The house Victor had arranged sat on 3 acres overlooking a valley. Modern construction disguised to look rustic. Security cameras hidden in decorative fixtures. Reinforced doors designed to survive forced entry. Every window bulletproof. It looked like paradise built on paranoia. "This is home?" Michael asked, staring at mountains that disappeared into clouds. "For now," Lucian said. "Maybe longer if we like it." They settled in slowly. Learning the house, learning the grounds, learning Spanish from a tutor who came 3 times a week and believed they were a Canadian family with no prior language experience. Emma and Michael enrolled in an international school under their new names, made friends, started adapting with the frightening speed of children who'd learned that survival meant becoming whoever you needed to be. Selena found work remotely, grant writing for nonprofits, which paid enough to contribute to expenses without requiring her to explain her work history. Lucien invested what money he'd managed to move offshore before federal seizures, started building something new, something legal, something that didn't require violence to maintain. 3 months passed, then 6, then 8. Then, Chicago became distant memory. Adrian Voss was convicted of multiple felonies and sentenced to 15 years minimum. The Calabrese family's leaders who'd survived the compound assault were arrested on federal charges. Lucien's former empire was carved up by successors who tried maintaining control and mostly failed because power vacuums attracted chaos. Viviana's murder remained unsolved. Officially, the Calabrese family had killed her. Unofficially, nobody knew and everyone had stopped caring. On their 9th month in Costa Rica, Selena woke before dawn and found Lucien sitting on the terrace watching mist burn off the valley. He still carried scars from the compound, physical ones in his left arm that didn't move quite right, psychological ones in how he flinched at sudden noises. She brought him coffee. They sat in silence watching the country wake up around them. "Do you miss it?" she finally asked. "The power? The empire? Being Lucien Moretti instead of Anthony Castellano?" He thought about it for a long time. "I miss the certainty. When I was Lucien Moretti, I knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of. Now, I'm just someone who used to be dangerous trying to figure out how to be normal." He sipped his coffee. "But no, I don't miss it. Because Lucien Moretti was a monster who rationalized violence by calling it necessary. Anthony Castellano might be a lie, but at least he's trying to be someone better. You saved my life. You saved my children. You destroyed an empire protecting us." She looked at him. That's not a monster. That's the best person I've ever known. That's because you're comparing me to Adrian Voss. Bar's pretty low. I'm comparing you to everyone I've ever met who had the power to help and chose not to because getting involved was inconvenient. She set down her coffee. You chose differently. Every time. Even when it cost you everything. Lucian turned to face her. Morning light caught in his gray eyes. You know what the strangest part is? I spent 20 years accumulating power because I thought it would make me feel less helpless. Then I lost it all and discovered I feel more human now than I ever did when I was running Chicago's criminal underground. He smiled slightly. Turns out power doesn't make you stronger. It just insulates you from having to feel anything real. So what do we do now? Just live here pretending to be Canadian consultants until our fake identities become more real than our actual histories? Maybe. Or maybe we teach your children that sometimes you have to destroy who you were to survive, but rebuilding yourself afterwards is what determines whether the destruction was worth it. He reached across and took her hand. We survived, Selena, against odds that should have killed us. That has to mean something. Behind them, the house came alive with morning sounds. Emma and Michael arguing about breakfast, coffee brewing, life happening in the mundane way that felt miraculous after months of running. Selena looked at Lucian, this man who'd given up everything because he couldn't walk past someone bleeding, who'd remembered his mother freezing in an alley and decided nobody else would die invisible on his watch, who'd lost an empire and found humanity in the ruins. Thank you, she said quietly, for stopping your car that night, for seeing me when everyone else just walked past. Thank you for reminding me that being dangerous is worthless if you only use it to protect yourself. He squeezed her hand. I was becoming my father. You stopped that. Probably saved my life in ways that have nothing to do with bullets. They sat together watching Costa Rica's mountains emerge from mist while their children ate breakfast and prepared for school and lived lives that wouldn't include explaining why their last name changed or why they'd never had a real childhood birthday party or why their mother flinched at sudden movements. The past would always be there. Adrian's abuse, Lucian's violence, the compound assault, the bodies, the federal warrants. All of it carved into their histories in ways that would never completely fade. But sitting on that terrace drinking coffee while the world came alive around them, Selena realized something that felt like wisdom earned through surviving impossible things. The opposite of power wasn't helplessness. It was choosing connection over control. Choosing to care about people even when caring cost you everything. Choosing to rebuild humanity after violence stripped it away. Lucien had been Chicago's most dangerous man. Now he was Anthony Castellano, consultant, father figure to children who'd never trust easily again, partner to a woman who'd learned that survival meant becoming strong enough that protection wasn't always necessary. It wasn't the ending either of them had imagined when he stopped his car on a frozen Chicago street 9 months ago. But it was the ending they'd earned by refusing to quit even when quitting looked like the only rational choice. Emma appeared on the terrace carrying her school bag. We're going to be late. Then let's not be late, Selena said, standing. They drove to school through mountains that seemed impossibly green after Chicago's gray winters. Dropped off children who'd learned more about survival at 9 and 7 than most adults ever would. Returned to the house where Lucian had morning meetings with investors interested in legitimate business ventures that didn't require violence. Selena spent the day writing grant proposals for organizations helping women escape domestic violence. The work felt significant in ways that had nothing to do with money. Every dollar she raised meant another woman might survive what she'd survived, might find safety before it was too late. Around 3 in the afternoon, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Paranoia from months of running didn't fade just because you'd established new identity. But something made her pick up. Maria Castellano? A woman's voice, professional, American accent. Speaking. This is Jennifer Watts, your former attorney. I'm not sure if you remember me, but I remember. Selena's blood went cold. How did you get this number? I have friends who are very good at finding people who don't want to be found. Don't worry, I'm not calling on behalf of anyone who wishes you harm. Jennifer paused. I'm calling because Adrian Voss died yesterday. Prison assault. Killed by another inmate over what was officially reported as a gambling debt. The news should have felt significant, should have felt like closure. Instead, Selena just felt tired. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know that the man who hurt you for 12 years is gone, that he can't hurt you anymore, that whatever nightmares you're still carrying, they end with his death. Jennifer's voice softened. And because I wanted you to know that what you did, collecting that evidence, surviving long enough to use it, protecting your children through everything, it mattered. You mattered. A lot of women in your situation don't survive. You did. That's worth knowing. After she hung up, Selena sat in silence, processing information that felt less important than it should have. Adrian was dead. The man who'd beaten her, manipulated courts, stolen her children, sent men to kill her, dead in a prison assault that was probably not actually about gambling debts. She walked outside to find Lucien working in the garden they'd started planting last month. Vegetables, mostly. Things that required care and patience and belief that tomorrow would come. Adrian's dead, she said without preamble. Lucien stopped digging. How? Prison assault. She looked at him carefully. Did you? No. His answer was immediate and certain. I don't have those connections anymore. And even if I did, I wouldn't have used them. Adrian was facing 15 years. He'd already lost everything that mattered to him. Killing him would have been mercy. He leaned on the shovel. Sometimes the cruelest punishment is making people live with the consequences of who they were. Selena believed him, not because she needed to, but because she'd learned to recognize truth in his voice. How do you feel? Lucien asked. I don't know. Empty, maybe? Like something I'd been carrying just disappeared and now there's space where it used to be, but I'm not sure what to fill it with. She sat down on the garden's edge. I spent so long being afraid of him, years planning my escape, more years running from the damage he'd caused. And now he's just gone and I'm still here, and I don't know what that means. It means you survived. It means your children have a mother who fought for them when the world said she wasn't worth fighting for. It means Adrian spent his last year knowing he'd lost to someone he thought was weak. Lucien's voice was gentle. That's not nothing, Selena. That's everything. That night they told Emma and Michael, explained carefully that their father had died, watched them process grief that was complicated by years of manipulation and the relief that came from knowing they'd never have to see him again, held them while they cried, let them ask questions that didn't have good answers. Being a parent, Selena was learning, meant carrying your children through terrible truths and hoping the honesty served them better than comfortable lies. The months continued passing. Emma and Michael grew taller, more confident, more fluent in Spanish than their parents, made friends who didn't know they were living under false identities, brought home report cards and art projects and stories about school that sounded blessedly normal. Lucien built a consulting firm that actually consulted instead of operating as a criminal front, made money legally, paid taxes, became the kind of boring businessman whose biggest risk was market volatility. Selena's grant writing turned into program management for a nonprofit helping abuse survivors across Central America. She traveled occasionally, always nervous about airports and border controls, but never stopped. Used her experience to help women who were living through what she'd escaped. 1 year became two became three. Chicago faded into the kind of distant memory that felt like it had happened to someone else. Lucien Moretti and Selena Reyes stopped feeling like their real names. Anthony and Maria Castellano became who they actually were, not just covers, but identities built through choice rather than circumstance. On the 3-year anniversary of landing in Costa Rica, they got married in a small ceremony attended by Emma, Michael, and a handful of friends who knew them only as the Canadian family who'd moved south for a better life. No criminal associates, no federal agents watching from surveillance vans, no violence lurking beneath the surface. Just two people who'd survived impossible things choosing to build something new from the ruins of who they used to be. The wedding was simple. Selena wore a white dress that cost less than her wedding to Adrian. Lucien wore a suit that wouldn't have looked out of place in Chicago, but here just made him look like someone trying too hard. They exchanged vows that were honest rather than romantic, promises to keep choosing each other, to keep protecting the family they'd built, to keep remembering that humanity was worth fighting for even when violence felt easier. Emma and Michael stood as witnesses, both of them taller than they'd been 3 years ago, both carrying scars from childhoods that had been stolen and rebuilt, both smiling despite everything because their mother was happy and the man who'd saved them had become their father in every way that mattered. Afterwards, they had dinner at a restaurant that overlooked the valley. talked about plans for the future. Michael wanted to study medicine. Emma wanted to be an artist. Selena wanted to expand the nonprofit's reach. Lucien wanted to keep growing vegetables and being boring, and never having to make decisions that required choosing between terrible options. They were, by most measures, extraordinarily ordinary, and that ordinariness felt like the greatest victory any of them could have achieved. That night, after Emma and Michael were asleep, Selena and Lucien sat on their terrace watching stars that seemed brighter than anything she remembered from Chicago. Music played somewhere in the valley. Dogs barked. Life happened in ways that felt mundane and miraculous. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd just driven past that night?" Selena asked. "If you'd decided I wasn't worth stopping for?" "Every day," Lucien admitted. "I wonder who I'd be now, probably dead or in federal prison. Definitely still the man who'd forgotten why power was supposed to matter." He looked at her. "You didn't just save your own life when you survived Adrian. You saved mine by giving me a reason to remember I was human. That's a lot of weight to put on someone you found bleeding on a sidewalk." "Maybe. But it's the truth. I'd spent 20 years becoming someone my father would have been proud of. Cold, calculating, willing to sacrifice anything for power. Then I saw you and remembered my mother and realized I'd become exactly the kind of man who'd walked past her while she froze to death." His voice was quiet. "You gave me permission to be different, to choose humanity over power, to remember that caring about people isn't weakness." Selena took his hand. "We saved each other then. From different things, but still." "Yes." They sat in silence for a while. Comfortable. Connected. Two people who'd survived by refusing to become the monsters the world expected them to be. "What do we tell Emma and Michael someday?" Selena finally asked. "When they're old enough to understand what really happened. When they ask about their real names and why we're living under false identities. We tell them the truth, that their father was a criminal who hurt people, that I was a different kind of criminal who hurt different people, that their mother was brave enough to survive both of us and smart enough to collect evidence and strong enough to keep fighting when everyone said she should quit." Lucien's grip tightened. "We tell them that sometimes survival requires becoming someone you're not proud of, but rebuilding afterwards is what determines whether you're worth saving. And if they hate us for the lies, then we accept that. We apologize. We give them whatever space they need to process the fact that their childhood was built on necessary deceptions." He looked at her. "But we also make sure they understand that every choice we made, every lie, every sacrifice, every moment of running was to keep them safe. That has to count for something." "Does it count for something?" "I don't know. Maybe we won't know until they're adults looking back at their childhood, trying to understand how they became who they are." He was quiet. "But I think most parents are just doing their best with impossible situations and hoping the love makes up for the mistakes. We're no different." It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it was an honest one. And honesty, Selena had learned, was the best foundation for anything worth building. The years continued passing the way years do when you're no longer running. Slowly, steadily, marked by birthdays and holidays and the small accumulations of ordinary life. Emma grew into a teenager who painted beautiful things and asked difficult questions about identity. Michael became quietly brilliant, excelling at school and already talking about university. Selena's nonprofit expanded across 3 countries. Lucien's consulting firm succeeded enough to be boring. They were happy. Not the uncomplicated happiness that came from easy lives, but the hard-won satisfaction of people who'd survived terrible things and built something real from the wreckage. 5 years after landing in Costa Rica, Selena stood on the same terrace where they'd gotten married, watching Emma and Michael leave for school. Both of them nearly grown. Both of them strong and complicated and carrying scars they'd learned to live with. Lucien appeared beside her with coffee. They'd developed this ritual over years. Morning coffee on the terrace, watching the valley wake up, stealing quiet moments before the day demanded attention. "They're going to be okay," he said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because they survived what should have broken them. Because they had parents who fought for them when it would have been easier to quit. Because they learned early that the world is dangerous, but that doesn't mean you stop trying to find beauty in it." He sipped his coffee. "They're going to be more than okay. They're going to be exceptional." Selena hoped he was right. Hope that the foundation they'd built through honesty and sacrifice and refusing to let violence define them was strong enough to support whatever Emma and Michael chose to become. "What about us?" she asked. "Do we ever get to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop? Stop checking over our shoulders? Stop being afraid that someone from Chicago will find us?" I don't know. Maybe never completely. Maybe that's just part of who we are now, people who survived by learning to always be a little bit prepared for disaster. He set down his coffee and pulled her close. But I think we get to stop letting fear dictate every choice. We get to build lives worth protecting instead of just constantly protecting lives. That's the difference between running and surviving. It was a good answer, maybe even true. They stood together watching morning light burn away mist while their children laughed somewhere in the house, and the world continued turning, and Costa Rica spread out below them, green and alive and completely indifferent to who they used to be. Selena thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, bleeding on a Chicago sidewalk, convinced nobody cared enough to stop. Thought about the journey from that moment to this one, all the violence, all the fear, all the impossible choices that had somehow led to this terrace, this man, this life. She thought about Adrian dead in prison, Viviana dead in Lake Michigan, the Calabrese family destroyed, Lucien's empire scattered, all that death and destruction, and none of it had been worth anything except buying time for the people who mattered to escape. In the end, that was what power came down to. Not controlling others, but protecting the people you loved, even when protection cost everything you'd built. Lucien had learned that lesson by losing his empire. Selena had learned it by surviving her own destruction and rebuilding from nothing, and now they were teaching it to Emma and Michael, not through lectures but through example, showing them that strength wasn't about dominance but about choosing to care when everyone said caring was weakness. The sun climbed higher, the day demanded attention. There was work to do, children to raise, lives to continue building. But for one more moment, Selena and Lucien stayed on that terrace, holding each other, while the valley came alive below, and the past stayed safely in the past where it belonged. They'd survived. They'd rebuilt. They'd found something worth protecting in the ruins of everything they'd lost. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was more than enough. Maybe that was everything.